Hello, I'm Arthur Reed. Welcome to the World War II History Channel, where we explore the pivotal moments and untold stories of the greatest generation. Long before a machine ever touches the sky, it is only a quiet wish whispered into the wind. Imagine, if you will, a single room bathed in the soft, golden light of late afternoon. The year is just beginning to tilt toward a dark and uncertain horizon, but inside this room, all is perfectly still. The air is warm, thick with the comforting, earthy scent of cedar wood shavings, roasted coffee, and the faint, sweet dust of old paper. Dust motes dance lazily in the slanting sunbeams that press through the large, paned glass windows. Beyond those windows, the sky is a vast, pale canvas of scattered clouds, drifting in no particular hurry. This is not a battlefield. There are no sirens here, no harsh shouts, no thunder of artillery. This is a sanctuary of thought. A drafting room. It is a quiet place where ordinary men with rolled-up sleeves and ink-stained fingers sit upon tall wooden stools, leaning over broad, sloping tables. Before them lie vast sheets of vellum, so thin and pale they look like captured fog. These men are not soldiers. They are dreamers. They are architects of the wind, tasked with something that feels, in these fragile hours, entirely impossible. They have been given a heart. A massive, heavy, beating heart of iron and steel. It is an aircraft engine of unprecedented size, a sleeping giant that rests in a warehouse nearby, smelling of dark oil and cold metal. It is so powerful that it frightens them just a little to stand near it. Their task is to build a body around this heart. To give it wings. To somehow take this heavy, brutal thing and teach it how to dance gracefully among the clouds. If you were to walk softly down the aisles between the drafting tables, you would not hear the sounds of a world preparing for a great struggle. You would hear only the gentle rustle of a turning page. The soft clinking of a ceramic coffee mug being set down on a wooden saucer. The rhythmic, hypnotic scratching of graphite sliding over paper, like the sound of dry autumn leaves brushing against a window pane. At one of these tables sits a man named Thomas. He is a junior draftsman, no older than 25, though the faint shadows beneath his eyes speak of long, sleepless nights. The collar of his white shirt is unbuttoned, his tie loosened against the afternoon warmth. He pauses, resting his wooden pencil against the edge of the table, and rubs his tired eyes with the heel of his hand. Thomas reaches into the breast pocket of his shirt and pulls out a folded piece of stationery. It is a letter he has been writing in quiet moments to his wife, Mary, who is waiting for him in a small house miles away, keeping the home fires burning while the world holds its breath. He unfolds the paper, smoothing the creases with a gentle thumb. My dearest Mary, the letter begins, the ink slightly smudged from the warmth of his chest. The paper before me is so very blank today, and the sky outside seems so impossibly big. We are trying to build a saddle for a hurricane. They have given us a mountain of an engine, and they want us to make it float like a feather. Every line I draw feels heavy. I look at my pencil, and I realize that the curve I sketched today might, one day, keep a young boy safe above a lonely, endless ocean. It is a terrifying magic, Mary. I miss the quiet of our garden. I miss the smell of the rain on our porch. But I will stay at this desk until we get it right. Because someone's son is going to need this beautiful bird to bring him home. Thomas folds the letter, tucking it safely back over his own beating heart. He takes a deep, slow breath, picks up his pencil, and returns to the vellum. This is the hidden weight of creation. These engineers, these quiet men in their suspenders and spectacles, carry a burden that no scale can measure. They know, in the silent spaces between their thoughts, that they are not merely drawing lines. They are drawing lifelines. Every millimeter of wing, every gentle curve of the fuselage, every rivet and bolt they place upon the paper is a silent prayer for the young, unseen men who will one day sit in the cockpits. They are trying to wrap a shield of thin aluminum around the fragile bodies of sons, brothers, and husbands. As the sun begins to dip lower, painting the drafting room in deepening shades of amber and rose, the enormity of their problem becomes clearer. The giant engine requires a propeller so massive, so wide, that if they attach it to a normal airplane, the spinning blades will simply strike the earth. It is a gentle puzzle, but a stubborn one. How do you raise the nose of the plane high enough to clear the ground, without making the landing gear so tall and spindly that it snaps like a dry twig under the weight? They sit in the twilight, sketching and erasing. Erasing and sketching. Leaving behind soft smudges of gray on the white vellum. The rubber shavings fall to the floor like gray snow. They are searching for elegance in a world that is demanding brute force. They want to find a compromise between the sky and the earth. It is in these very human moments of struggle and reflection that history is truly made. It is not made in sudden flashes of lightning, but in the slow, steady burn of a desk lamp in the dark. When we look back at these quiet corners of the past, it is so easy to feel a deep yearning to connect with them. To reach out and touch the fabric of that era, to hold a piece of that quiet resilience in our own hands, or to see those skies brought vividly to life. We want to remember the courage of the men at the drafting tables and the brave souls who eventually took their creations into the blue. If you feel that same gentle pull toward history, you might find comfort in exploring some beautiful World War II memorabilia, or perhaps sitting down in the quiet of your own home to watch a deeply moving film like Midway on Amazon. It is a wonderful way to honor the past and keep these stories breathing. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The drafting room has grown dark now. The large windows are squares of deep, midnight blue, dotted with the pale silver light of distant stars. One by one, the desk lamps blink on, casting pools of warm, yellow light across the sea of tables. The room feels smaller now, cozier, like a cabin entirely isolated from the turning of the world. Someone from the back of the room quietly sets a fresh pot of coffee on a table, the rich, dark aroma mingling with the scent of the cedar shavings. There is no loud talking. Just a murmured word of thanks, a soft sigh, the clink of a spoon stirring cream. Thomas is still awake. His eyes are heavy, the kind of heavy that feels like a soft blanket pulling you toward sleep. But he does not close them. He is staring at a new line he has just drawn. He has bent the wing. On the paper before him, he has drawn a line that dips downward from the body of the plane, and then gracefully angles back up, like the inverted wing of a seagull gliding over a quiet beach. It is strange. It is entirely unconventional. But as he stares at it in the pool of yellow light, a profound sense of peace washes over him. By bending the wing downward, the lowest point of the plane is suddenly much closer to the ground. They can attach short, incredibly strong landing gear to that lowest point. The fragile legs will not snap. And the massive propeller, attached high up on the nose, will have all the room it needs to spin freely in the air without ever touching the earth. It is a beautiful, elegant solution. It is a blueprint painted not with rigid mathematics, but with the fluid grace of nature itself. Thomas leans back in his wooden chair. It creaks softly in the silent room. He rubs his hand over his face and smiles, a small, tired, private smile. He does not shout. He does not run to his supervisor. There will be time for that when the morning comes. For now, in the deep quiet of the night, he simply lets himself feel the relief. He has found the answer. He has built the saddle. He looks back out the dark window. The clouds are invisible now, hiding in the night, but he knows they are out there, waiting. He thinks again of Mary, asleep in their small bed, breathing softly in the dark. He thinks of the unknown young man who will one day climb into this magnificent, bent-winged bird. "We did it," Thomas whispers to the empty room, his voice barely carrying past the edge of his desk. "We found a way." Around him, the other men continue to work, their heads bowed in silent dedication. The scratching of the pencils continues, a soothing lullaby of progress and hope. They do not yet know the legendary name this plane will carry. They do not know the roaring thunder it will make, or the distant oceans it will cross. To them, tonight, it is simply a drawing. A delicate web of graphite lines holding back the dark. The sleeping giant of an engine still waits in the warehouse, but it is no longer quite so terrifying. They have built a home for it. They have crafted a cradle of aluminum and steel, born from patience, born from tired eyes and letters sent home, born from the quiet love of men who simply wanted to build something beautiful enough to keep the sky safe. As the night deepens into the quietest hours before the dawn, the drafting room remains a beacon of soft yellow light. The dust motes still dance gently in the glow of the lamps. The cedar shavings still smell sweet. And the blueprint on Thomas's desk rests peacefully, a perfect, silent promise of wings yet to unfold, waiting for the morning sun to wake it from its slumber. Before the thunder breaks the silence, there is only a deep, trembling hum that starts in the soles of your feet. Imagine stepping into a cavernous warehouse in the quiet, misty hours of early morning. The air inside is cool and still, carrying the heavy, intoxicating perfume of aviation fuel, hot iron, and the sharp, earthy tang of industrial grease. Shafts of pale morning light cut through the high, frosted windows, illuminating swirling clouds of dust that seem to hold their breath in anticipation. In the very center of this vast, shadowed space rests something that looks less like a machine and more like a dormant star, pulled from the sky and bound in steel. This is the engine. It is a radial masterpiece, a sprawling circle of cylinders radiating outward from a central hub, heavy and unyielding. It sits upon a heavy steel test stand, surrounded by a tangle of thick rubber hoses and wires, like an ancient giant tethered to the earth. Standing around this sleeping giant is a small circle of men. They are mechanics, men with deep lines etched around their eyes and hands calloused from years of wrestling with stubborn metal. They wear faded canvas overalls, forever stained with the dark, beautiful ink of their trade. Among them is Elias, a man whose graying hair is tucked beneath a worn cloth cap. Elias does not look at the engine with the cold, calculating eyes of a mathematician. He looks at it the way a seasoned stable master looks at a wild, untamed stallion that has just been brought in from the plains. There is caution in his gaze, yes, but also a deep, abiding reverence. Elias steps forward, his boots making soft, scuffing sounds on the concrete floor. He reaches out a hand, his knuckles scarred from slipping wrenches, and gently rests his palm against the cold, curved cowling of the top cylinder. He closes his eyes for a moment, just feeling the sheer density of the thing. To the world outside, this is merely a piece of equipment. But to Elias, and the men beside him, it is a living entity waiting for its first breath. They know the terrifying power locked inside this iron shell. They know that if they can awaken it safely, it will change the very fabric of the sky. "All right, boys," Elias murmurs, his voice barely rising above a hushed whisper, as if he is afraid of startling the beast. "Let's see if she wants to sing today." The men move with a quiet, practiced ballet. There are no shouted orders, only the soft clicks of switches, the turning of heavy brass valves, and the low, reassuring murmurs they exchange with one another. One man primes the fuel, a rich, amber liquid flowing into the heart of the engine. Another adjusts the heavy leather straps holding the test stand in place. They are gentle, methodical, treating the immense machine with a delicate touch that belies its brutal purpose. And then, the sequence begins. There is a mechanical whine, a struggling, high-pitched plea as the starter motor tries to turn the massive internal crankshaft. For a second, nothing happens. The giant resists. Then, a sudden, wet cough echoes through the warehouse. A puff of thick, blue-gray smoke erupts from the exhaust pipes, drifting lazily up into the rafters. Another cough. A sputtering, uneven heartbeat. The men hold their breath. Elias keeps his hand hovering just inches from the metal, feeling the sudden, violent shudder run through the machine. Then, ignition. It is not a sound you hear with your ears, it is a sound you feel in your chest. The sleeping giant awakes with a roar that instantly swallows the vastness of the warehouse. But even in its immense volume, there is a rhythm, a deep, rhythmic pulse that throbs like the beating of a heavy, mechanical heart. The concrete floor trembles. The pale light from the windows seems to vibrate. Elias and the men step back, wiping grease from their foreheads, a slow, shared smile spreading across their faces. The wind generated by the spinning test propeller washes over them, flattening their clothes against their bodies, blowing away the early morning chill. It is a warm wind, smelling of burnt oil and raw power. They stand there in the hurricane of their own making, dwarfed by the magnificent roar, bound together by the secret knowledge of what they have just brought to life. On a small wooden workbench in the corner of the room, a forgotten ceramic teacup begins to dance. The vibrations from the mighty engine ripple through the floorboards, up the legs of the table, making the little white cup tremble and inch its way toward the edge. It finally tips over, falling to the floor with a soft crash, breaking into pieces. No one notices. No one cares. They are entirely captivated by the song of the giant. When the engine is finally throttled down and the heavy switches are pulled shut, the silence that rushes back into the room feels almost heavier than the noise. The propeller spins slower, and finally stops, the blades casting long, still shadows across the floor. The giant is asleep again. But now, it is warm. The air is filled with the soft, metallic tink-tink-tink of cooling iron. Elias approaches the engine once more. The heat radiating from it is intense, like standing near a stone hearth on a winter's night. He pulls a clean rag from his pocket and begins to gently wipe away a small streak of oil from the side of a cylinder, patting the metal as if thanking it for a job well done. In these quiet moments, after the deafening roar has faded, the true weight of their work settles upon them. They gather around a battered thermos, passing a tin cup of steaming coffee between them, warming their oil-stained hands. They talk in hushed voices about their families, about the changing weather, about the letters they have received from sons and brothers already far away from home. Elias sits on an overturned wooden crate, staring into the dark surface of his coffee. He thinks of his own boy, a young man with bright eyes and a crooked smile, who has just earned his pilot's wings. Elias knows that out there, somewhere in the vast, unknown expanse of the world, men like his son are waiting for a miracle. They are waiting for a machine that can carry them through the darkness and bring them safely back to the light. Looking up at the massive engine, Elias feels a profound sense of responsibility. He knows that this trembling, fire-breathing giant is only half of the equation. It is powerful, yes, but it is raw and untamed. It needs the gentle curve of Thomas's bent wing. It needs a body to hold it. But for now, in this grease-stained sanctuary, Elias has done his part. He has coaxed the heartbeat from the iron. We often view history through a polished lens, seeing only the gleaming, finished airplanes soaring gracefully through the clouds. But the true story is found right here, in the dirt, the oil, and the deafening, unfiltered reality of the test stands. It is found in the trembling hands of mechanics and the untamed nature of a world at war. There is a profound honesty in these unpolished moments, the raw fragments of history that are often smoothed over or hidden away. If you feel drawn to looking directly into the eyes of that history, to witnessing the unblurred, deeply human realities of those days, I have carefully gathered a collection of unseen, raw media from the war. It is a digital archive of images and videos over on my Gumroad, showing the true, uncensored faces of the men and machines that shaped our world, moments too real and unfiltered to be shown here. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the morning wears on, the warehouse slowly empties, leaving the engine to rest in the quiet sanctuary of the shadows. The scent of burnt oil lingers, a ghost of the thunder that had just filled the room. The mechanics wash their hands in deep tin basins, watching the dark grease spiral down the drain, but they know they can never truly wash away the connection they have forged with the machine. It is in their blood now. It is a part of their own heartbeat. Elias is the last to leave. He pauses at the heavy sliding door, pulling his cloth cap down slightly against the glare of the morning sun. He looks back one final time at the massive, intricate circle of metal. It is no longer just a piece of machinery to him. It is a promise. A promise made of steel, waiting patiently for the moment it will be married to the beautiful, bent-wing saddle that is being drafted in a quiet room across town. "Sleep well," Elias whispers into the dusty air. He steps out into the daylight, closing the heavy door behind him. The giant remains in the cool dark, holding its warmth, holding its immense power, silently dreaming of the day it will finally be given the sky. There is a quiet magic in the moment when a paper dream first touches the cold, hard reality of metal. Imagine a vast workshop, long after the sun has set. The large industrial windows are painted black against the night, holding back the chill of the evening. Inside, the space is illuminated by a constellation of low-hanging work lamps, casting pools of warm, amber light across sweeping wooden tables. The air is entirely different here than in the drafting rooms or the engine testing bays. It smells of shaved pine, beeswax, and the clean, sharp scent of newly milled aluminum. This is the place where ideas are given physical weight. It is a quiet sanctuary of craftsmen, men who do not speak in loud voices or hurried tones. They communicate in the slow, deliberate movements of their hands, in the thoughtful passing of a tool, and in the shared, silent understanding of the metal they are working to tame. In the center of this amber glow stands a massive wooden skeleton. It is called a buck, a life-sized wooden mold carved by hand to represent the exact shape the airplane will eventually take. It smells of the forest, rich and earthy, a beautiful contradiction to the mechanical beast it is helping to birth. Over this wooden skeleton, the men are gently laying sheets of silver. Among these men is a craftsman named Arthur. He is older than the draftsman, his hair turned entirely silver, matching the sheets of aluminum he holds. He wears a heavy, worn leather apron that has softened over decades of use, smelling faintly of old oil and warm hands. Arthur is a man who understands the secret language of metal. He knows that you cannot force it, you cannot rush it, and you certainly cannot shout it into submission. You must persuade it. You must coax it into the shape you desire. Arthur runs his bare hand over a long, flat sheet of aluminum resting on his workbench. It is cold to the touch, smooth as glass, reflecting the yellow light of the bulb above. He closes his eyes and pictures the delicate, swooping line that Thomas, the young draftsman, had drawn on the vellum so many miles away. The inverted gull wing. A wing that dips down toward the earth before reaching up toward the sky. It is a shape found in nature, in the elegant glide of seabirds, but it is entirely unnatural to a sheet of flat, rigid metal. With a soft, wooden mallet, Arthur begins his work. He does not strike the metal, he taps it. Tap. 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 The sound is muffled, rhythmic, like the steady dripping of rain from a cabin roof. With each gentle impact, the silver sheet yields just a fraction of a millimeter. Arthur shifts his weight, sliding his calloused thumb over the newly formed curve, feeling for imperfections that the eye could never see. He is searching for the perfect tension, the exact moment where the metal surrenders its stiffness and accepts its new purpose. He is trying to bend the wind. That is how Arthur thinks of his work. He is not just shaping aluminum, he is sculpting the air itself. He knows that one day, this piece of metal will be hurtling through the sky, tearing through the invisible currents of the atmosphere. The shape he hammers tonight will determine how the wind catches the plane, how the wind holds it up, how the wind allows it to dance. If his curve is too sharp, the wind will fight it. If his curve is too shallow, the heavy, sleeping giant of an engine will drag them all down. He must find the exact, harmonious balance between the stubbornness of the machine and the fluid grace of the sky. Across the table, another craftsman, a young man with flour-white dust on his cheeks, slides a cup of hot black tea toward Arthur. Arthur pauses, sets down his wooden mallet, and wraps his hands around the warm ceramic. He nods his thanks. They stand there in the quiet hum of the workshop, sipping the sweet tea, looking at the silver skin slowly growing over the wooden bones. "It's a strange bird, this one," the younger man whispers, his voice filled with a gentle awe as he traces the downward slope of the wing with his eyes. "She is," Arthur replies softly, the steam from his tea curling into the warm air. "She has to be. She's carrying a terrible weight. She needs these broad, heavy shoulders to hold herself up. But look at the bend. Look at how it reaches down. It's almost as if she's bowing to the earth before she leaves it." Arthur reaches into the pocket of his trousers and touches a small, folded piece of paper. It is a letter from his nephew, a boy barely out of school who has just been sent to a naval training base near the ocean. The boy wrote about the smell of the salt air, the vast emptiness of the horizon, and the quiet fear that sometimes creeps into his bunk late at night. Arthur thinks of his nephew's young, unlined face every time he strikes the metal. He is not building a weapon of war. In the soft light of the workshop, he is building a shield. He is crafting a lifeboat with wings. He wants to make this metal so strong, so perfectly attuned to the wind, that it will cradle his nephew and bring him safely back to the harbor. Every careful tap of his wooden mallet is a silent promise. "I will hold you up. I will not let you fall." The hours drift by, measured only by the slow, beautiful bending of the aluminum. The workshop is a symphony of quiet creation. The soft scrape of a file smoothing an edge. The whisper of sandpaper over a rivet hole. The low, rumbling hum of a distant generator. It is peaceful here. It is a world away from the gathering storms across the oceans. Here, in this room, there is only the pure, innocent desire to make something beautiful, to solve a puzzle of gravity and grace. The inverted gull wing is incredibly difficult to build. It requires a mastery of angles and curves that test the patience of every man in the room. They must seamlessly join the downward slope to the upward reach, creating an elbow of metal that must be stronger than any other part of the plane. It is the place where all the stress of the massive engine, the weight of the landing gear, and the tearing force of the wind will converge. Arthur and his team treat this joint with a profound reverence. They lay the metal over the wooden buck like a tailor fitting a bespoke suit. They heat the aluminum gently with soft flame torches, warming it just enough to make it pliable, the metal glowing with a faint, ephemeral iridescence in the dim light. They massage it into place, their hands moving in slow, sweeping arcs, coaxing the silver to remember this new shape. There is an immense, quiet dedication required to preserve these stories, to dig through the forgotten corners of history and find the gentle moments of humanity hidden beneath the sweeping narratives of the world. It takes time, patience, and a deep love for the people who shaped our past. If you find peace in these hidden stories, and if you would like to help support the quiet, late-night research that brings these whispers of history to life, I have set up a Ko-Fi page where you can leave a small tip, even just $1, to help keep this journey going. It is a wonderful way to join this community of history lovers and ensure these everyday heroes are never forgotten. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the deep night slowly begins to surrender to the very first, pale hints of dawn, a stillness settles over the workshop. The men begin to set down their tools. The wooden mallets are placed carefully on the benches. The soft flames of the torches are extinguished with a gentle hiss. Arthur stands back, wiping his hands on his leather apron, and looks at what they have done. The wooden skeleton is no longer visible. In its place rests a gleaming, perfect wing. It is vast, much larger than one might expect, stretching out across the room like a great silver sail. The curve is flawless. It dips downward from where the body of the plane will be, reaching toward the floor, before elegantly sweeping back up toward the ceiling. In the quiet, pre-dawn light filtering through the high windows, the metal seems to softly glow from within. It does not look like a machine part. It looks like a piece of modern sculpture, a frozen wave of silver waiting to crash against the sky. Arthur walks over to the lowest point of the bend, the gentle elbow of the wing. He runs his bare hand over the joint. It is smooth, seamless, a perfect marriage of strength and beauty. He can feel the faint, residual warmth of the metal, a lingering memory of the fire and the hands that shaped it. He smiles. It is a tired, weary smile, but one filled with a deep, quiet satisfaction. He knows that the draftsman drew the lines, and the mechanics built the heavy heart, but it is here, in this room, that the dream has finally been given a body. They have taken a heavy, impossible problem, and they have bent the wind around it. The younger craftsman steps up beside Arthur, his hands resting on his hips. He doesn't say a word. He just stares at the long, graceful sweep of the aluminum, his eyes reflecting the pale morning light. Somewhere in the distance, a bird begins to sing, a small, fragile melody welcoming the new day. Arthur thinks again of his nephew, of the vast oceans, and of the incredible journey this silver wing is about to take. It will leave this quiet, dusty sanctuary. It will be bolted to the massive, roaring giant of an engine. It will be painted deep, ocean blue. And it will be sent out into the unknown. But for now, in this fleeting, peaceful moment, it is just a beautiful, quiet thing resting in the dawn. It is a testament to the patience of human hands, to the quiet resilience of men who work in the shadows, shaping the future one gentle tap at a time. Arthur reaches up and turns off the amber work lamp above his bench. The yellow light fades, replaced entirely by the cool, silver glow of the morning. He takes off his leather apron, folds it neatly, and places it next to his wooden mallet. "She'll fly," Arthur whispers to himself, his voice barely a breath against the stillness of the room. "She's going to fly beautifully." He turns and walks slowly toward the heavy wooden doors of the workshop, his footsteps echoing softly on the floorboards. Behind him, the great, bent wing waits in the quiet light, a masterpiece of persuasion, a gentle apology to gravity, resting peacefully before it is asked to carry the weight of the world into the sky. There is a profound, heavy silence that falls over an airfield just before a dream is asked to carry its own weight. Imagine a runway stretching out into the early morning mist, a long ribbon of dark asphalt disappearing into a soft, pale fog. The world is perfectly quiet, save for the gentle rustle of the wind through the tall, dew-soaked grass lining the edge of the tarmac. The sky above is a delicate shade of lavender, caught in the quiet hesitation between the dark of night and the breaking of dawn. Out of the open hangar doors, a shape begins to emerge. It is being pulled slowly, carefully, by a small tractor, but it looks less like a machine and more like a great, sleeping creature being drawn from its cave. This is the prototype. The culmination of the late nights in the drafting room, the deafening roars of the test stands, and the quiet, persistent tapping of wooden mallets against silver metal. All the pieces have finally been brought together. The magnificent, bent wings sweep down toward the earth before reaching up, framing a nose that is impossibly long and thick, built to house the sleeping giant of an engine. It is unpainted, the raw aluminum skin glowing with a ghostly, silver light in the morning mist. A small crowd of men walks alongside it. Their collars are turned up against the morning chill, their hands thrust deep into the pockets of their wool coats. They do not speak. There is nothing left to say. The blueprints have been rolled up and put away. The tools have been set down. Now, all that remains is the unforgiving truth of gravity. Among these men is a pilot named Julian. He is a young man, though his eyes hold the quiet, steady calm of someone much older. He wears a heavy leather flight jacket, the collar lined with worn fleece. He walks with a slow, deliberate pace, his eyes never leaving the silver machine. Julian is not a man who seeks glory or the thrill of danger. He is a man who listens. He listens to the wind, he listens to the subtle vibrations of metal, and he listens to the quiet voice inside him that tells him when a machine is ready to leave the earth. The tractor comes to a halt, the engine clicking off, leaving the airfield in silence once more. The heavy chocks are placed gently against the large rubber tires. Julian approaches the aircraft. He looks up, and for the first time, he feels the true, intimidating scale of what they have built. The propeller blades, towering high above his head, look large enough to belong to a ship rather than an airplane. The nose stretches out so far in front of the wings that it feels like looking at a beautifully sculpted wall of aluminum. Elias, the older mechanic whose hands are forever stained with the dark ink of his trade, steps up beside Julian. Elias holds a soft cloth, absent-mindedly wiping a smudge of condensation from the curved metal of the wing. He looks at Julian, offering a small, reassuring nod. It is a silent exchange of trust. Elias is handing over the heartbeat he coaxed from the iron, asking Julian to carry it safely into the sky. Julian reaches out and places his bare hand flat against the cold silver skin of the fuselage. He closes his eyes and takes a deep, slow breath of the morning air, smelling the damp earth, the sharp scent of aviation fuel, and the metallic tang of the aircraft. He is introducing himself to the machine. He is asking for its cooperation. With a slow, heavy breath, Julian begins to climb up onto the wing. He steps carefully into the dip of the inverted gull shape, his boots making soft, hollow sounds against the metal. As he pulls himself up and over the edge of the cockpit, he realizes just how strange this bird truly is. The cockpit is set remarkably far back, situated almost near the tail, behind the massive expanse of the engine. When he settles into the worn leather of the pilot's seat, the view before him is startling. He cannot see the ground directly in front of him. The massive nose of the plane points upward at a steep angle, blocking the horizon entirely. It feels, for a fleeting moment, as though he is sitting on the back of a magnificent, blind beast, entirely dependent on feeling rather than sight. Before he fastens his heavy canvas harness, Julian reaches into the inner pocket of his flight jacket. He pulls out a small, folded piece of paper. It is not a map, and it is not a set of test parameters. It is a handwritten note from his younger sister, wishing him a quiet sky. He does not unfold it, he only rubs his thumb over the worn crease of the paper, drawing comfort from the simple, everyday love it represents. He tucks it safely away, close to his own beating heart. It is here, in the quiet solitude of the cockpit, that the polished myths of history fade away, leaving only the raw, unfiltered reality of a human being facing the unknown. These are the moments that rarely make it into the official records, the uncensored truths of fear and courage that we often lose to time. If you find yourself wanting to look beyond the history books, to hear the unvarnished stories and explore the deeper, raw history of these times, I invite you to join our Patreon community. There, we share free podcasts, deep dives, and uncensored accounts that bring these deeply human experiences to life. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Julian lets out a long, slow exhale. He reaches forward and begins to move the heavy switches on the panel before him. The metallic clicks sound unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. He primes the fuel, feeling the mechanical resistance of the levers. He nods to Elias, who is standing on the tarmac below. Elias raises a hand, signaling that the propeller is clear. Julian engages the starter. There is a high, strained whine that cuts through the morning fog, a sound of immense effort as the internal gears struggle to turn the sleeping giant. The massive propeller blades lumber in a slow, hesitant circle. 1 rotation. 2. Then, the engine catches. A thick plume of blue smoke erupts from the exhaust, washing over the side of the silver fuselage. The sound is an immediate, physical force. It is the roar from the test warehouse, but now, it is unchained. The entire airframe shudders with a violent, rhythmic vibration. Julian can feel the deep thrum of the pistons traveling up through his boots, through the leather seat, and into his very bones. The plane trembles on the tarmac. It is a heavy, awkward trembling. The massive power of the engine seems to be fighting against the constraints of the brakes and the rubber tires. The wings shake, the ailerons rattling softly. It is a creature that does not belong on the earth, desperate to free itself from the ground that is holding it back. Julian carefully advances the throttle just a fraction. The roar deepens, becoming a steady, deafening hum. He can see the men on the ground taking a step back, the wind from the immense propeller whipping their coats around their knees. The chocks are pulled away. Julian releases the heavy brakes. The plane surges forward with a sudden, eager lurch. As he steers the heavy machine toward the edge of the runway, he feels its clumsiness. The long, stiff landing gear makes the plane bounce slightly over the uneven asphalt. It feels incredibly heavy, incredibly ungainly. The vast nose still obscures his vision, forcing him to look out the side windows, zigzagging slowly just to see the path ahead. He lines up at the end of the long ribbon of tarmac. The fog has begun to lift, revealing the pale, rising sun at the far end of the runway, casting a long, golden path across the asphalt. Julian takes one last, quiet moment. He rests his gloved hand on the throttle lever. He thinks of the draftsmen in their quiet rooms. He thinks of Arthur, tapping the aluminum into its graceful curve. He thinks of his sister's letter. He carries all of them with him. Smoothly, steadily, he pushes the throttle forward. The response is terrifying and magnificent. The roar of the engine becomes a wall of sound that entirely envelopes him. The vibration smooths out into a continuous, driving force. The heavy machine accelerates, throwing Julian back against the leather seat. Outside, the tarmac blurs into a gray river. The wind begins to shriek over the glass canopy. Julian feels the subtle shift in the controls. The air is beginning to catch beneath the great, silver wings. Gently, he pushes the control stick forward. The tail of the aircraft lifts off the ground. Suddenly, the massive nose drops, leveling out, and for the first time, Julian can see the runway racing directly ahead of him. The bouncing of the tail wheel ceases. The plane is balanced on its two main wheels, tearing through the morning mist like a silver arrow. The trembling changes. It is no longer the awkward, heavy shaking of a machine fighting the earth. It is the taut, thrumming vibration of a bowstring pulled tight. The wings are biting into the cold morning air, finding their perches, bending the wind just as they were designed to do. Julian pulls back, ever so slightly, on the control stick. There is a moment, a single, suspended heartbeat, where the rumbling vibration of the wheels against the asphalt simply stops. The heavy, clumsy creature of metal and oil is suddenly weightless. It severs its ties to the earth. As the ground falls away beneath them, a profound smoothness washes over the cockpit. The noise of the engine remains, but it is no longer fighting. It is singing. The great, silver wings slice through the lavender sky, carrying the impossible weight with a sweeping, effortless grace. Down below, on the dew-soaked grass, Elias and the men stand in absolute silence. They watch as the silver shape climbs higher and higher, catching the first golden rays of the morning sun. The heavy anxiety that had settled in their chests slowly dissipates, replaced by a quiet, breathless awe. Julian looks out through the canopy. The world is vast and open. The controls in his hands feel responsive, alive, like extensions of his own arms. The terrible trembling of the tarmac is gone, left far behind in the mist. Up here, bathed in the gentle light of the dawn, the heavy, impossible dream is finally flying. Even the most beautiful wings can cast a heavy, cold shadow when they finally try to return to the earth. Imagine a vast, rolling ocean, painted in the deep, melancholy indigo of late afternoon. The water is endless, stretching out to touch the sky in every direction, empty and unimaginably deep. In the middle of this vastness, a solitary ship carves a quiet, white path through the waves. It is an aircraft carrier, a floating island of steel. To the men standing upon its flat, wooden flight deck, it is their entire world. To a pilot miles above in the sky, looking down through the thin, freezing air, it looks impossibly small. It looks like a mere postage stamp drifting on a dark, restless pond. High above those clouds, the silver prototype has been painted the color of the deep sea. It has been given its uniform. Up here, where the air is thin and pure, the bent-wing bird is a masterpiece. It dances with the clouds, its massive engine singing a steady, powerful lullaby. The pilot inside, a young man named David, feels an overwhelming sense of freedom. The plane is fast, remarkably smooth, and handles with a grace that makes him feel as though the wings are simply an extension of his own shoulders. But a flight, no matter how beautiful, must eventually end. A bird must return to its nest. And this is where the quiet terror begins. As David throttles down and begins his slow descent toward the carrier, the joy of the flight evaporates, replaced by a heavy, cold knot in his stomach. The design that made the plane so magnificent in the open sky is suddenly its greatest curse. The engine, that massive, sleeping giant that Thomas and Elias worked so hard to tame, is housed in a nose so remarkably long that it creates a wall of metal directly in front of David's eyes. As he points the nose up to slow his descent, the carrier deck completely disappears from his view. He is flying blind. Worse still, the great engine leaks tiny, almost imperceptible drops of dark oil. In the rushing wind, this oil is blown back onto the glass canopy, smearing it with a thick, blurry film. The afternoon sun hits the smeared glass, creating a blinding glare. David is exhausted. His hands, gripping the control stick, are slick with sweat inside his leather gloves. He has to unlatch his canopy, sliding it back, and physically lean his head out into the freezing, rushing slipstream just to see the ship. The wind tears at his face, pulling at his goggles, roaring in his ears, drowning out the steady beat of his own heart. He is trying to land a heavy, roaring beast onto a tiny, moving piece of wood, and he cannot even see where his wheels are. Down below, the deck crew stands in tense, suffocating silence. They are young men, barely out of high school, wearing brightly colored cloth helmets that flutter in the ocean breeze. They hold their breath as they watch the beautiful blue silhouette approach. The landing signal officer stands at the very edge of the ship, holding two cloth paddles. He is the only connection David has to the deck. The officer waves the paddles, a silent, desperate language of gestures trying to guide the blind pilot home. David watches the paddles, adjusting his throttle, feeling for the deck he cannot see. The ship rises and falls with the gentle breathing of the ocean. David cuts the engine. The roar fades into a sudden, eerie quiet, replaced only by the howl of the wind over the wings. The plane drops. The heavy rubber tires strike the wooden deck. But there is no relief. There is no triumphant screech of brakes. Because the very landing gear that was shortened to fit the bent wing is stiff. It is unforgiving. It does not absorb the weight of the massive engine, it rebounds against it. The moment the wheels touch the wood, the entire airplane violently bounces back into the air. It is a terrifying, slow-motion ballet of physics gone wrong. The plane leaps back up, 10 feet, 20 feet above the deck, floating helplessly. It hangs there in the salty air, entirely out of control, a graceful bird suddenly turned clumsy and tragically dangerous. Its nose drops. The heavy engine pulls it forward. The arresting hook, designed to catch the thick steel cables on the deck, swings uselessly in the empty air. When it comes down a second time, it is not a landing. It is a slow, agonizing fall. The propeller strikes the wooden deck, shattering into wooden splinters that fly like shrapnel. The heavy landing gear collapses with the sickening crunch of tearing aluminum. The beautiful, bent wing strikes the deck, scraping along the surface with a sound like a long, painful sigh. It does not end in a fiery explosion. It ends in a heavy, tragic settling of broken metal. The plane slides to a halt, tangled in the safety barricades, hissing steam and leaking fluids onto the wood. The silence that follows is the heaviest sound in the world. The brightly colored deck crew rushes forward, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear for the young man trapped inside the metal cage. They climb over the wreckage, pulling at the jammed canopy with desperate, bare hands. When they finally pull David from the cockpit, he is trembling. He is unhurt, but his eyes are distant, haunted by the profound helplessness of those floating seconds in the air. He leans against the shoulder of a young mechanic, unable to support his own weight, staring blankly at the ruined masterpiece that rests in a tangled heap on the deck. That night, in the dim, red-lit corridors of the ship, the wardroom is quiet. There is no laughter, no clinking of coffee cups. The men sit in worn leather chairs, staring at the floor. In his small, metal-walled bunk, David sits on the edge of his thin mattress. He holds a pen over a piece of paper, trying to write a letter to his mother. He wants to tell her he is safe. He wants to tell her about the beautiful blue sky. But his hand is shaking too much to form the letters. He puts the pen down, turns off the small reading lamp, and sits in the dark, listening to the creaking of the ship and the relentless sound of the water against the hull. The word Widowmaker begins to drift through the passageways. It is a quiet, venomous whisper. The men look at the remaining Corsairs parked on the deck not with awe, but with deep, simmering mistrust. They feel betrayed. The machine that was supposed to be their shield has become a blade pointed at their own hearts. These unseen tragedies, these hidden flaws and quiet sacrifices, are the heavy burdens carried by the men who lived through this history. They are the untold stories of failure, the secret struggles, and the hidden operations that happened far away from the polished narratives we so often read. There is a profound depth to the past that is rarely brought into the light. If you are drawn to the truth behind the curtain, to the forgotten facts and the hidden heroes of these times, I would love to share my free ebook with you, titled The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. You can get it by joining my email newsletter, where we take gentle, weekly deep dives into the quiet corners of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Thousands of miles away, in a quiet office bathed in the pale light of morning, Thomas sits at his drafting table. The room smells of old paper and dust. The phone on his desk has just stopped ringing. He holds a small, yellow telegram in his hand. The words are brief, typed in cold, black ink, detailing the crash. The bounce. The shattered propeller. The terrified pilot. Thomas slowly lowers the paper to his desk. He looks out the large glass window, but he does not see the clouds or the birds today. He sees David's face. He sees the faces of all the young men he had thought about when he first drew that graceful, dipping line on the vellum. A profound, suffocating sorrow washes over him. He rests his elbows on the wooden table and buries his face in his hands. The silence of the drafting room is broken only by the soft, ragged sound of his breathing. He had tried to build a saddle for the hurricane, but the hurricane was too wild. He had tried to bend the wind, but the earth had refused to accept it. He feels the weight of every shattered piece of aluminum pressing down on his own chest. The men who designed the engine, the craftsmen who shaped the metal, they all received the news in quiet, devastating fragments. They had poured their hearts into this creation, hoping to save lives, and now they are forced to confront the terrible reality that they have built something uniquely dangerous. Arthur, the silver-haired metalworker, stands in his dusty workshop, staring at the wooden buck that once held the shape of the wing. He reaches out and touches the rough wood, his eyes filled with a quiet, dignified grief. He thinks of his young nephew by the sea, and he prays quietly that the boy never has to climb into the cockpit of the machine he helped build. The judgment comes down from the admirals, swift and uncompromising. It is delivered not with anger, but with the cold, pragmatic logic of survival. The Corsair is deemed entirely unfit for carrier duty. It is too dangerous. It is too heavy, too blind, and too unpredictable to land on the shifting decks of the ships. It is a beautiful failure. Orders are typed. Papers are stamped. The grand dream of the magnificent, ocean-going fighter is quietly folded up and put away in a filing cabinet. Back on the aircraft carrier, in the gray, misty light of the following dawn, the deck crew gathers around the remaining planes. They do not look at them with the reverence they once held. They simply go to work. They fold the heavy, bent wings upward, locking them in place so the planes take up less room. They push the heavy blue machines to the very edge of the deck, securing them with thick chains. They are parked in the shadows, out of the way. As the sun rises over the vast, empty ocean, casting long, melancholy shadows across the flight deck, the planes sit entirely silent. The massive engines are cold. The cockpits are empty. They look like grand, majestic birds that have had their wings clipped, tethered to the iron deck, watching the open sky they are no longer allowed to touch. The sea breeze whispers through the cooling fins of the engines, a soft, mournful sound. The men walk past them without a second glance. The beautiful machine has been rejected by the very sailors it was built to protect. And in the quiet, dusty drafting rooms back home, the engineers turn off their desk lamps, leaving their blueprints in the dark, wondering if they have entirely failed the boys they had sworn to bring home. When you are sent to the very edge of the world, even the most beautiful wings begin to gather dust. Imagine a place where the ocean is so blindingly blue it almost hurts your eyes to look at it, yet the land is nothing more than a tiny, stifling sliver of crushed white coral and dense, suffocating jungle. The air here does not breeze, it hangs. It is heavy, damp, and perfectly still, smelling intensely of rotting vegetation, salt, and the sharp, unnatural tang of aviation fuel baking in the relentless sun. This is not a grand, floating fortress of steel. There are no clean, wooden flight decks here, no crisp uniforms, and no gentle ocean winds to lift a plane into the sky. This is an island airstrip, carved entirely by hand out of the humid dark of the Pacific wilderness. It is a place for outcasts. And resting at the edge of this glaring white runway, their deep blue paint caked in a thick layer of fine, chalky dust, are the banished machines. The grand, beautiful birds that had failed to tame the carrier decks have been sent away, unloaded from transport ships onto these isolated shores, and handed over to the Marines. To the Navy, the planes were dangerous and flawed. They were widowmakers. But to the men living in the canvas tents at the edge of the jungle, these heavy, roaring beasts were a lifeline. They were orphans, given to men who often felt orphaned themselves, stationed thousands of miles from home on patches of sand that most mapmakers had forgotten to draw. If you were to walk along the edge of the jungle, keeping to the narrow sliver of shade offered by the drooping palm fronds, you would see a young mechanic named Leo. He is shirtless, his canvas trousers soaked through with sweat and stained with a mixture of dark engine oil and white coral dust. He is sitting on an overturned ammunition crate beneath the massive, bent wing of a Corsair. The wing acts as an umbrella, casting a deep, merciful shadow over him. Leo holds a small, damp rag in his hands, gently wiping the dust from a delicate hydraulic line. He moves slowly, deliberately, conserving his energy in the stifling heat. He does not view this plane as a failure. He views it as a companion in the dirt. He runs his hand along the metal strut of the landing gear. He knows the stories. He knows this stiff, unforgiving steel had caused heartbreak on the ships. But here, on this long, crude runway of crushed coral, the bounce doesn't matter. The earth here is solid. The runway stretches out far enough to forgive the plane's heavy, clumsy return to the ground. The machine that was a terror on the water has found a strange, gritty home in the sand. Leo pauses his work and reaches into his trouser pocket, pulling out a letter from his mother. The paper is soft and worn, folded and unfolded so many times that the creases are nearly tearing. He reads the words not for the information they carry, but for the quiet comfort of her voice that he can hear in his mind. She writes of the cool autumn breeze sweeping through their hometown. She writes of the leaves turning amber and gold, of the smell of wood smoke from the chimney, of the quiet evenings sitting on the front porch with a cup of hot cider. He closes his eyes, leaning his head back against the massive rubber tire of the airplane. For just a moment, he is there. He can feel the crisp air against his face, a beautiful phantom sensation that momentarily chases away the suffocating heat of the island. He breathes in slowly, holding the memory close, wrapping it around himself like a protective blanket against the loneliness of the Pacific. These quiet moments of profound longing are the hidden heartbeat of history. It is not just about the roar of the engines or the grand sweep of global events. It is about the young men sitting in the dust, holding onto a piece of paper as if it were the only tether keeping them bound to the earth. When we uncover these stories, it is natural to want to reach out and hold onto that history ourselves. To surround ourselves with gentle reminders of their resilience and the world they left behind. If you feel that quiet connection to the past, you might find a deep sense of comfort in exploring some beautiful World War II memorabilia, or perhaps settling into your favorite chair for a quiet, reflective evening to watch the powerful film Midway, available on Amazon. It is a wonderful way to honor these forgotten island outposts and keep their memory breathing. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the afternoon sun begins to lower, turning the sky into a brilliant, bruised tapestry of violet and orange, the silence of the island is broken by a low, distant thrumming. Leo opens his eyes and folds the letter away. He stands up, squinting into the blinding glare of the setting sun. The sound grows, a deep, rhythmic hum that vibrates in the chest before it ever reaches the ears. The patrol is returning. Out of the hazy horizon, shapes begin to form. They look like heavy, dark seabirds gliding toward the coral strip. As they approach, the distinctive silhouette becomes clear, the long, massive nose, and the elegant, inverted gull wings dipping low to the earth. One by one, the planes touch down. The coral runway erupts in massive plumes of white dust, a blinding snowstorm of crushed shell and sand trailing behind each aircraft. The planes bounce heavily, but the long earth absorbs their awkwardness. They rumble toward the parking areas, their massive engines roaring, blowing the humid air into a fierce, artificial gale. A plane rolls to a stop near Leo's tent. The heavy engine sputters, coughs a cloud of blue smoke, and finally falls silent. The great propeller blades click to a halt. The pilot, a young man named James, pushes the heavy canopy back. He slowly lifts himself out of the cockpit and climbs down the side of the fuselage, his boots slipping slightly on the well-slicked metal. James looks exhausted. His face is pale, marked by deep red lines where his goggles have pressed into his skin for the last 4 hours. His flight suit is dark with sweat. He does not walk away immediately. He stands next to the plane, resting his gloved hand on the warm aluminum of the long nose. He gives it 2 gentle, weary pats. "Good girl," he whispers into the twilight. Leo walks over, carrying a tin cup of tepid water, and hands it to James. They do not say much. There is a profound, shared language in their silence. James takes the water, drinking it slowly, looking out over the endless ocean that he has just spent hours staring at from above. "She ran hot today," James finally murmurs, his voice raspy from the dry oxygen in his mask. "But she brought me back. She always brings me back." That was the strange, beautiful truth of their banishment. The plane may have been discarded by the admirals, but to James and the other pilots, it was a fortress. The massive engine in front of them acted as a thick shield of iron, protecting them from anything the sky could throw their way. The heavy wings could take an immense amount of punishment and still keep flying. They knew she was difficult. They knew she was blind on the landing and heavy in the turn. But she was strong. And out here, at the edge of the world, strength was the only currency that mattered. The mechanics and the pilots formed an unspoken pact with the discarded machines. They wiped the coral dust from their windshields. They patched the canvas control surfaces. They spent their sleepless nights under the stars, tuning the engines, listening to the delicate ticking of cooling metal as the tropical night finally settled over the island. As darkness falls, the blinding white runway turns to silver under the light of a brilliant, heavy moon. The heat of the day slowly releases from the sand. The island comes alive with the hum of insects and the soft, rhythmic crashing of the waves against the reef. Leo sets up his canvas cot directly beneath the wing of the Corsair. Many of the men do this. It is cooler out here than in the stagnant tents, and there is a strange, protective comfort in sleeping beneath the shadow of the great machine. He lies down, lacing his fingers behind his head, and looks up at the underside of the silver wing. It blocks out the stars directly above him, a solid roof built of Thomas's quiet dream and Arthur's patient hammering. Leo listens to the metal of the engine gently pinging as it cools down in the night air. It sounds like a slow, metallic heartbeat. He thinks of his mother's letter again, of the front porch and the autumn leaves. But as the gentle exhaustion of the day finally pulls him towards sleep, he does not feel quite so alone. He is resting in the quiet sanctuary of the banished, protected by a beautiful, flawed creation that is simply waiting for its time to rise again. And as the ocean breeze finally whispers through the palm trees, carrying the sweet scent of rain from a distant squall, the great, sleeping engines sit silently on the coral sands, holding their strength, completely unaware of the solitary mind back home that is about to change their destiny forever. The loudest battles are sometimes fought in the absolute stillness of an empty room. Imagine a small, unassuming office tucked away on the second floor of a brick building, far from the restless oceans and the blinding white sands of the Pacific. The hour is impossibly late. The rest of the city has long since surrendered to sleep, wrapping itself in the heavy, comforting blanket of a quiet, moonless night. Outside the window, a gentle, rhythmic rain has begun to fall, the drops tapping softly against the glass like thousands of tiny, delicate fingertips seeking shelter from the dark. Inside this room, there is only one source of light. It is a simple, brass desk lamp with a green glass shade, casting a warm, concentrated pool of amber illumination across a large, cluttered wooden desk. The air in the room is thick and still, carrying the comforting, familiar scents of old paper, pipe tobacco, and coffee that has long since gone cold in its ceramic mug. Sitting in the center of this amber pool of light is a man named William. William is not a soldier. He wears no uniform, no medals of valor upon his chest. He wears a soft, knitted cardigan, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and wire-rimmed spectacles that rest gently on the bridge of his nose. He is a man of quiet contemplation, an engineer whose mind operates not in the loud, rushing torrents of combat, but in the slow, deliberate, unseen currents of physics and flow. While the world outside is consumed by the deafening roar of a global conflict, William sits in absolute, profound silence. But his mind is far from at peace. Spread out before him on the vast wooden desk are dozens of photographs and blueprints. They are pictures of the magnificent, bent-wing bird, the Corsair. But these are not the proud, soaring photographs of a triumph. They are the quiet, heartbreaking records of its banishment. He sees the shattered wooden decks of the aircraft carriers. He sees the collapsed metal of the landing gear. And, most painfully, he looks at the candid, unstaged photographs of the young pilots stranded on the distant, coral islands, sleeping beneath the massive wings of the machines that the world has deemed too dangerous to fly from the ships. William reaches out with a gentle hand and picks up one of the photographs. It is slightly blurred, taken in the humid, fading light of a jungle airstrip. It shows a young man, a pilot whose face is smeared with grease and exhaustion, leaning heavily against the dark blue fuselage of his plane. The boy looks entirely spent, carrying a weight far heavier than the canvas pack slung over his shoulder. William traces the edge of the photograph with his thumb. He feels a deep, suffocating pang of responsibility. He knows that he and his fellow engineers built a marvel of the sky. They built a plane that could outrun the wind. But in their pursuit of unbreakable strength, they had forgotten the necessity of grace. "We made her too proud," William whispers to the empty room, his voice barely rising above the soft patter of the rain against the window pane. "She is so strong, she refuses to bow to the earth." He sets the photograph down and pulls a thick roll of vellum toward him, unfurling it beneath the warm light of the lamp. It is a detailed, intricate drawing of the airplane's landing gear, the long, steel legs that reach down from the beautiful curve of the wing to touch the ground. To anyone else, it is merely a drawing of metal tubes, springs, and valves. But William possesses a quiet, extraordinary gift. He does not see cold, dead metal. He sees a living, breathing system. He sees the intention of the machine. He closes his eyes and leans back in his creaking wooden chair, listening to the soothing rhythm of the rain. In his mind, he is no longer in the office. He is standing on the wooden flight deck of the aircraft carrier. He watches the heavy, blue plane drop from the sky. He watches the rubber tires strike the deck. He slows the moment down in his imagination, stretching a single second into a quiet eternity. He pictures the inside of the steel landing gear strut. It is filled with thick hydraulic fluid, designed to act as a cushion. But as the immense weight of the massive engine crashes down upon the deck, the fluid is compressed too quickly. It hits a wall of pressure. And because the fluid has nowhere to go, because it cannot escape, it violently rebounds. The energy of the fall is rejected, thrown right back into the frame of the airplane, sending the heavy machine bouncing helplessly, terrifyingly, back into the air. It is a battle of stubborn forces. The heavy airplane falls, the unyielding ship resists, and the stiff steel legs, caught in the middle, simply push back. William opens his eyes. He slowly removes his spectacles, rubbing the tired, red indentations on the bridge of his nose. The problem is not that the landing gear is too weak. The problem is that it is too rigid. It lacks the quiet humility to absorb the shock. He thinks of the boys on the Coral Islands. He knows they are relying on these machines. He knows that if this plane cannot return to the ships, it cannot serve as the great shield it was meant to be. The fleet will remain vulnerable, and the young men will remain stranded in the suffocating heat of the jungle, fighting a lonely war on the edges of the map. William picks up his pencil. It is a simple tool, just a slender piece of wood surrounding a core of graphite, but in the hands of a quiet mind, it is capable of changing the course of history. He does not begin to draw immediately. He simply holds it, feeling the smooth wood against his fingertips. He is searching for a philosophy rather than a mere mechanical fix. He is searching for a way to teach this machine how to yield. In our modern world, we so rarely get to see this raw, unvarnished side of history. The history we are often taught is made of polished silver and triumphant brass bands. But the true story of survival, the real texture of the past, is found in these quiet, desperate hours. It is found in the smeared grease on a pilot's cheek, in the tired eyes of a mechanic, and in the lonely, late-night struggles of a man at a desk, trying to save lives with a pencil. If you find yourself wanting to look directly into the eyes of those unpolished realities, to step past the propaganda and see the true, unfiltered faces of the war, I have put together a collection of completely raw, unseen media, photographs and video fragments that are too real, too quiet, and too honest for standard history books. You can find this digital archive over on my Gumroad. It is a way to truly witness the hidden human experience of those days. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The rain outside begins to soften, turning from a steady drumming into a delicate, hushed whisper against the glass. William leans over the vellum once more. He stares at the drawing of the stiff steel cylinder that holds the hydraulic fluid. If the fluid hits a wall, it bounces back. That is the nature of the world. Force meets force. But what if there was no wall? What if, instead of resisting the immense pressure, the machine simply allowed the pressure to bleed away? He begins to sketch, his hand moving with a slow, deliberate grace. He does not draw a thicker piece of steel. He does not draw a heavier spring. He draws something incredibly small. He draws a tiny, delicate valve. He imagines the moment of impact again. The heavy plane strikes the deck. The immense pressure rushes through the strut. But this time, in his quiet imagination, the fluid does not hit a solid wall. Instead, it meets this tiny, newly drawn valve. As the pressure builds, the valve gently opens, just a fraction of a millimeter. It allows the thick fluid to slowly, smoothly escape into a different chamber. It is like slowly exhaling a breath you have been holding in your chest for too long. William watches the pencil lines form on the paper. The solution is so wonderfully simple, so deeply elegant, that he almost misses it. By simply allowing a tiny amount of fluid to flow through a restricted opening, the violent, explosive energy of the landing is transformed into heat. The shock is absorbed. The bounce is stolen away. The airplane would no longer fight the carrier deck. It would sigh, settle, and accept the earth. He stops drawing. He sets the pencil down gently on the desk, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile beauty of the realization. He looks at the tiny valve he has sketched in the corner of the massive blueprint. It is just a small adjustment. A tiny passageway for oil to flow. But William knows, with a profound, quiet certainty that settles deep in his bones, that this is the answer. This is the cure for the Widowmaker. A profound sense of relief washes over him, heavy and warm. The tight knot of anxiety that has sat in his chest for months finally begins to loosen. He reaches out and gently touches the blurred photograph of the tired young pilot in the jungle. "We're going to bring you home," William whispers to the face in the photograph. "We're going to give you back the sea." He does not celebrate. He does not shout in triumph. He simply sits in the warm amber light of his desk lamp, listening to the final, fading drops of rain. The noisy war continues to rage across the oceans, a storm of iron and fire that seems entirely unstoppable. But here, in this tiny, quiet room, a profound victory has just been won. The clock in the hallway chimes a low, soft note, signaling the approach of dawn. The deep black of the window pane slowly begins to soften into a bruised, melancholic gray. The night is over. William gathers the photographs and the blueprints, stacking them neatly on the corner of his desk. He turns off the brass lamp. The warm pool of amber light vanishes, replaced by the cool, pale silver of the early morning. He stands up, stretching his tired back, feeling the gentle ache of a long night's work. He walks over to the window and looks out at the wet, quiet streets below. The city is just beginning to stir. Somewhere out there, ships are being loaded, men are marching, and the great, roaring engines are being primed. But William knows that when the new day truly begins, he will hand this simple drawing to the machinists. They will cut the metal. They will install the tiny, breathing valves. And the magnificent, banished birds will finally learn how to land. He smiles, a soft, private smile of a quiet mind that has found harmony in a world of chaos. The answer was not louder thunder. The answer was not stronger steel. The answer, as it so often is, was simply finding the courage to yield. There is a secret language spoken only between tired hands and cold steel, whispered in the deep shadows of a sleeping hangar. Imagine walking into a massive, cavernous building made of corrugated iron, long after the chaotic rush of the day has surrendered to the night. The heavy wooden doors are pulled shut against the cool evening breeze, cocooning the space in a profound, heavy stillness. The air inside does not move. It hangs in the darkness, thick and fragrant, carrying the beautiful, earthy perfume of aviation fuel, damp canvas, shaved aluminum, and the deep, rich scent of industrial grease. High above, near the vaulted ceiling, a few solitary yellow bulbs cast warm, isolated pools of light down onto the concrete floor. The rest of the hangar is swallowed by deep, velvety shadows. In this quiet sanctuary, the world outside, the roaring oceans, the distant storms, the frantic turning of the globe, simply ceases to exist. There is only the here and now, and the gentle, settling hum of machines cooling in the dark. Standing in the center of one of these golden pools of light is a beautiful, dormant beast. It is a Corsair, its magnificent, bent wings painted in the dark, bruised blue of the deep ocean. It sits heavily on its landing gear, casting long, dramatic shadows across the floor. In the silence of the night, it looks less like a weapon and more like a great, sleeping bird, exhausted from a long and turbulent migration. Beneath the shadow of the plane's massive nose, a man is sitting on a small wooden stool. His name is Henry. Henry is not a young man. His face is lined with the quiet maps of 1,000 long nights, and his hands are permanently stained with the dark, indelible ink of his trade. Oil and grease have worked their way so deeply into the creases of his knuckles that no amount of harsh soap will ever wash them entirely clean. He wears faded denim overalls, the fabric softened by years of wear, and a small, gray cloth cap pushed back on his forehead. He is entirely alone with the airplane. And he prefers it this way. To Henry, an airplane is not merely an assembly of rivets and sheets of aluminum. It is a living, breathing entity. He believes that machines hold memories, that the metal absorbs the fear of the young men who fly them, that the engine remembers the desperate need for speed, and that the landing gear remembers the violent, unforgiving shock of the earth. He reaches into the breast pocket of his overalls and pulls out a small, soft cloth. With slow, deliberate movements, he begins to wipe a thin sheen of condensation from the thick steel strut of the landing gear. As he works, Henry thinks of the young pilot who had flown this very machine just hours earlier. A boy with bright, terrified eyes, who had climbed out of the cockpit trembling after a terrifyingly harsh landing on the runway. Henry had seen the plane bounce. He had heard the sickening screech of the rubber tires, the groan of the metal, and the explosive gasp of the hydraulic fluid fighting against its steel cage. It broke Henry's heart to watch. He knew the immense, loving care that had gone into building this machine. He knew the elegant curve of the wing was meant to be a masterpiece. But this beautiful bird possessed a fatal flaw. Its legs were simply too stiff. They were too proud. They refused to bend, refused to absorb the shock of returning to the ground. Henry pauses, resting his calloused hand flat against the cold steel of the strut. He closes his eyes and listens to the absolute quiet of the hangar. In his pocket, resting against his chest, is a letter from his own daughter. She is thousands of miles away, safe in a small house surrounded by a garden of sleepy blue hydrangeas. She writes to him about the simple things, the taste of fresh strawberries, the smell of rain on the pavement, the stray cat that has taken up residence on their porch. He carries her words with him like a talisman, a gentle reminder of the soft, beautiful world he is working so hard in the dark to protect. He wishes, with a profound, aching desperation, that he could make this machine as gentle as the world in his daughter's letter. He wishes he could take the violence out of its return to the earth. Earlier that evening, a supply truck had arrived at the edge of the airfield. Among the heavy crates of ammunition and the drums of fuel, there was a single, unassuming cardboard tube. It had been carried into the hangar and handed directly to Henry. Now, resting on a wooden workbench nearby, bathed in the soft yellow light of a desk lamp, is the paper that was inside that tube. It is the blueprint. The quiet realization from a solitary mind in a distant room. Henry slowly stands up from his wooden stool, his knees popping softly in the quiet. He walks over to the workbench and looks down at the vellum. He does not need to read complex mathematical formulas to understand what the drawing is asking him to do. He speaks the language of mechanics fluently, intimately. He traces the pencil lines with his grease-stained index finger. He sees the drawing of the stiff steel strut. And then he sees it. The tiny addition. The delicate, beautiful little valve. A slow, profoundly warm wave of understanding washes over him. He leans his weight against the edge of the wooden bench, letting out a long, quiet breath that he feels he has been holding for months. It is a masterpiece of empathy written in metal. The design does not ask for thicker steel to fight the impact. It does not ask for a heavier spring to force the plane down. Instead, it asks for a tiny passageway. It asks the machine to simply let go of the pressure. It provides a tiny doorway for the thick, trapped hydraulic fluid to slowly, smoothly escape. You just need to breathe, Henry whispers to the empty room, looking back over his shoulder at the massive, dark blue shape of the Corsair. We just need to let you breathe. He turns back to the airplane, his heart beating with a new, quiet rhythm of hope. This is where the magic of history truly happens. It does not happen on grand stages or in the loud halls of politicians. It happens here, in the oil and the grease, when a tired man with dirty hands realizes he finally has the power to save a life. He gathers his tools from a worn leather satchel. The wrenches are heavy, cold, and beautifully balanced. They clink softly against one another, a gentle, musical sound in the cavernous silence. He approaches the heavy landing gear again. He slides a large tin basin beneath the strut to catch the dark, resting oil. With a slow, steady pull of his wrench, he begins to loosen the heavy steel bolts holding the assembly together. The hangar smells of deep, metallic blood as the hydraulic fluid begins to slowly drain into the tin basin. It drips with a hypnotic, rhythmic sound. Drip. 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 It is the sound of the machine surrendering its old, rigid ways. As Henry works, his hands moving with the grace of a practiced artist, he feels a deep, spiritual connection to the men who designed this fix. He has never met William. He has never seen the rainy city where the blueprint was drawn. But tonight, they are brothers bound by a single, shared purpose. They are tied together by the invisible threads of compassion. There is a remarkable beauty in uncovering these quiet, unseen acts of devotion. Finding the tiny moments of grace hidden within the massive machinery of the past takes a gentle patience and a deep love for the human spirit. If you find peace in these quiet moments of history and wish to support the long, late-night hours of research that bring these forgotten whispers back to life, I would be so deeply grateful if you considered leaving a small tip on my Ko-Fi page. Even just $1 helps keep this journey going and ensures these everyday heroes are remembered. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The old, trapped fluid is completely drained now. The steel strut is hollow, waiting to be reborn. Henry reaches into a small wooden box and carefully lifts out the new component. It is small enough to fit in the palm of his hand, gleaming with the silver brightness of freshly milled metal. It is the bleed valve. The tiny piece of poetry that will teach the iron how to yield. He rolls it gently between his fingers, marveling at its simplicity. It weighs almost nothing, yet it carries the weight of 1,000 safe returns. With absolute precision, Henry fits the tiny valve into the heart of the landing gear. He tightens the fittings with his wrench, not with brute force, but with a delicate, knowing pressure. He stops the moment the metal feels secure, knowing instinctively where the sweet spot lies. He does not want to choke the valve, he wants it to be free to do its work. He then begins the slow process of refilling the strut with fresh, clean hydraulic fluid. The new oil is the color of amber, thick and pure. He pours it carefully, watching it vanish into the dark steel chamber, bringing the machine back to life. When the assembly is complete, Henry takes a fresh, clean rag and wipes away every last fingerprint, every stray drop of oil from the exterior of the strut. He polishes the steel until it gleams in the dim, yellow light of the hangar. He steps back, slipping the rag into his pocket. To the naked eye, the airplane looks exactly the same. The massive nose still points toward the heavy doors. The bent wings still cast their vast, dark shadows. The terrible, intimidating presence of the Widowmaker remains. But Henry knows the truth. The ghost has been chased from the machine. The stiffness is gone. He imagines the young pilot with the bright, terrified eyes climbing back into the cockpit tomorrow. He imagines the boy taking the plane high into the clouds, feeling the rush of the wind, and then the inevitable, terrifying return to the earth. Henry smiles a soft, private smile. Tomorrow, when those heavy rubber tires strike the tarmac, the plane will not fight back. The massive weight of the engine will push down, the pressure will build inside the steel leg, and the tiny, beautiful valve will quietly, gracefully open. The fluid will slip through the narrow passageway, transforming the violent energy into a gentle, settling sigh. The heavy, dark blue bird will not bounce into the air. It will simply sink into the embrace of the earth, as soft and as safe as a feather landing on a quiet pond. The hangar is still perfectly quiet. The yellow lights continue to burn, fighting back the shadows. Outside, the sky is just beginning to soften, turning from pitch black to the deepest, most melancholic shade of violet. The stars are slowly fading away, making room for the dawn. Henry walks back to his wooden stool and sits down. He reaches into his pocket and touches the folded letter from his daughter one more time. He feels a profound, deeply settling peace in his chest. He has done his part. He has listened to the whispers in the oil and the grease, and he has answered them with kindness. He leans his head back against the massive, solid rubber of the Corsair's tire. It feels warm against his neck. The smell of fresh amber fluid mingles with the old scents of the hangar. "You're going to be all right now," Henry whispers softly to the sleeping giant. "You're going to bring them all home." And in the deep, quiet sanctuary of the sleeping hangar, the mighty airplane rests in the shadows, entirely transformed. It is no longer just a machine of war. It is a promise, carefully built by dreamers, shaped by craftsmen, and finally, gently perfected by the tired, well-stained hands of a man who simply wanted to give the sky a softer place to land. Sometimes, the heaviest chains are broken not by a hammer, but by the weightless glide of ink across a thin white page. Imagine a grand, echoing hallway in a building constructed of pale stone, set safely back from the edge of a deep, gray harbor. The building is old, its wooden floors worn smooth by the passage of thousands of hurried footsteps, but at this hour, it is entirely still. The world outside is wrapped in the quiet, velvet dark of the very early morning, the kind of stillness that makes you feel as though you are the only person left awake on earth. A gentle, drifting fog has rolled off the harbor, pressing softly against the tall, glass windows. Inside a corner office on the third floor, a single lamp burns. It casts a warm, familiar pool of light across a heavy mahogany desk. Sitting behind this desk is a man named Arthur. He is an administrator, a man whose life is measured in the slow, relentless turning of paper. He wears a gray woolen vest over a white shirt, his reading glasses perched near the end of his nose. Arthur does not wear a uniform, and he has never flown an airplane. His battlefield is constructed entirely of manila folders, typed reports, and the endless, heavy weight of bureaucracy. But Arthur understands the terrifying cost of the paper he pushes. He knows that in a world at war, a single typed paragraph can send 1,000 young men into the dark, and a single signature can be the difference between a safe return and a tragic end. The air in the office smells of carbon paper, old binding glue, and the faint, comforting aroma of peppermint tea cooling in a porcelain cup. The only sound is the rhythmic, soothing ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway outside, a steady heartbeat measuring out the quiet hours of the night. Arthur's desk is covered in files concerning the beautiful, dark blue airplane with the inverted gull wings. The Widowmaker. For months, his days have been filled with heartbreaking reports of shattered landing gear, broken wooden decks, and the quiet, desperate letters from squadron commanders asking for a miracle. He has carried the burden of these failures as if they were his own, feeling a deep, suffocating guilt every time he reads a new report of a plane bouncing wildly out of control. He reaches out and opens the bottom drawer of his heavy desk. Inside, beneath a stack of blank forms, rests a small, wooden cigar box. He opens the lid. The box does not contain cigars, it is filled with personal letters. They are letters from the young pilots, letters that were never meant for the official record, but which Arthur has quietly collected to remind himself of the human beating hearts hidden beneath the statistics. He pulls out a piece of pale blue stationery. The handwriting is slightly hurried, slanted to the right, written by a boy from a small farm in the Midwest. Arthur reads the words softly to himself in the empty room. The boy writes about the terrifying beauty of the Corsair. He writes about the breathtaking speed, the feeling of invincibility high up in the clouds, and the deep, romantic love he has for the roar of the massive engine. But then, the ink seems to press harder into the page. The boy writes of the paralyzing fear that grips his chest the moment he has to lower the wheels. He describes the cold sweat, the trembling hands, and the helpless, floating terror of the bounce. "It feels like falling," the boy wrote. "It feels like the earth simply does not want us to come back." Arthur gently folds the pale blue paper and places it back into the wooden box. He closes his eyes and rubs his temples, feeling a profound, heavy sorrow. He is so tired of the fear. He is so tired of the broken wings. But tonight, sitting in the center of his desk, bathed in the amber glow of the lamp, is a new folder. It arrived late in the evening, hand-delivered by a weary messenger who had traveled straight from the testing grounds. The folder is thin. It does not contain hundreds of pages of dense mathematics or dramatic, sweeping redesigns. It contains only a few pages of typed notes and a single, beautifully drafted blueprint. It is the report on the tiny valve. Arthur opens the folder. The paper crackles softly in the silent room. He begins to read the account written by an engineer who had witnessed the field test. The words are simple, dry, and professional, yet to Arthur, they read like the most exquisite poetry he has ever encountered. The report describes the heavy blue airplane descending from the sky. It describes the massive engine, the long, stiff landing gear reaching down for the earth. And then, it describes the impact. But instead of the violent, terrifying rebound, instead of the helpless leap back into the air, the report details a completely different outcome. Upon contact, the typed words read, "The newly installed bleed valve allowed the hydraulic pressure to vent smoothly." The aircraft did not rebound. It settled immediately and firmly onto the surface. The shock was entirely absorbed. Arthur stops reading. He stares at the typed letters. It settled immediately. He reads the sentence again, and then a third time. He looks at the blueprint attached to the back of the report. He sees the drawing of the tiny, delicate valve, the gentle passageway designed to let the trapped oil breathe. It is such a beautifully simple thing. After all the anger, all the grief, all the discarded machines rusting on coral islands, the answer was not a massive overhaul. It was just a small moment of yielding. It was a gentle release of pressure. A heavy, exhausted sigh escapes Arthur's lips. It is a sound of profound, overwhelming relief. He leans back in his leather chair, the leather creaking softly in the quiet. He looks up at the dark ceiling, feeling the tight, painful knot in his chest simply melt away. The Widowmaker is gone. The beautiful bird has been healed. There are no cheering crowds in this room. There are no brass bands or triumphant parades. There is only an older man sitting alone in a quiet office, wiping a single, silent tear from beneath his reading glasses. This is the true face of victory. It is quiet. It is deeply personal. It is the overwhelming gratitude of knowing that tomorrow, a mother will not receive a telegram, and a young boy will not have to fear the earth. These quiet, bureaucratic rooms hold some of the most profound emotional weight of the entire era. The raw, unfiltered reality of this history is found in these intimate moments, and the secret letters kept in wooden boxes, and in the exhausted sighs of the men behind the desks. If you find yourself deeply moved by these hidden stories, and want to explore the uncensored accounts, the personal letters, and the raw history that never makes it into the standard textbooks, I invite you to join our Patreon community. There, we share exclusive podcasts and deep dives into the deeply human side of these grand events. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Arthur leans forward again, his hands resting on the edge of the mahogany desk. He looks at the final page of the report. At the bottom of the page, there is a blank line hovering above his typed name. It is the authorization line. The final, necessary step to turn this beautiful idea into reality. He reaches out and picks up his fountain pen. It is a heavy, black pen, worn smooth by years of use, its gold nib reflecting the warm light of the lamp. It is a beautiful, intricate little machine in its own right, relying on the careful, controlled flow of fluid, much like the very landing gear he is about to save. Arthur unscrews the cap. He rests the side of his hand against the thick, cream-colored paper. He thinks of the boy who wrote the letter on the pale blue stationery. He thinks of the mechanics with oil-stained hands, working in the dark, cavernous hangars. He thinks of the grand, banished airplane sitting on the blinding white coral, waiting for permission to be great again. He brings the gold nib down to the paper. Scratch, scratch. The sound of the pen moving across the page is incredibly soft, barely louder than a whisper, but it is the sound of a heavy chain breaking. The dark blue ink flows smoothly from the nib, sinking deeply into the fibers of the paper, forming the letters of his name. With that simple, quiet stroke of the pen, everything changes. The order is official. Tomorrow, the telegraph machines will chatter to life. Memos will be typed and distributed across the vast, sprawling oceans. Small wooden crates containing the tiny, silver valves will be loaded onto supply ships and flown to the most remote corners of the world. In hangars on distant islands, mechanics will gently drain the old, rigid fluid from the landing gear and install the new parts. They will wipe their hands, step back, and watch as their pilots climb into the cockpits without the heavy shadow of fear hanging over their shoulders. Arthur carefully lifts the pen from the paper. He blows softly on the dark ink, watching the wet sheen slowly dry to a matte, permanent finish. It is done. The impossible puzzle has been solved. He screws the cap back onto the fountain pen and places it gently in its wooden holder. He closes the manila folder and sets it squarely in the center of his desk, ready for the morning messengers. The heavy grandfather clock in the hallway chimes a low, resonant note, signaling the end of the long night. Outside the tall windows, the thick fog resting over the harbor is beginning to glow with the very first, pale light of the dawn. The dark waters are turning a soft, pearlescent gray. Arthur stands up, stretching his legs. He picks up his cold cup of peppermint tea and carries it to the window, resting his hand against the cool glass. He looks out at the sleeping ships moored at the docks, their tall masts disappearing into the mist. He feels lighter than he has in months. The world is still fractured, the oceans are still dangerous, and there is still so much work to be done. But in this one, quiet corner of the war, a profound kindness has prevailed. A machine built for destruction has been taught how to be gentle. As the sun finally breaks over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the wooden floor of the office, Arthur smiles. It is a soft, peaceful smile. He knows that somewhere, far away, a beautiful, dark blue bird is preparing to take to the sky, and for the first time, it will not be afraid to come home. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over the endless ocean when a quiet theory, drawn on a fragile piece of paper, is finally asked to prove itself against the unforgiving iron of a ship. Imagine a sky so vast and deeply blue that it seems to swallow the entire world. High above the restless, rolling waves of the Pacific, a solitary airplane cuts a smooth path through the thin, freezing air. It is the Corsair, painted in the bruised, melancholic colors of the deep sea. Its magnificent, inverted gull wings cast a long, fleeting shadow over the tops of the brilliant white clouds. Inside the cockpit sits a young pilot named Peter. He is bundled in a heavy leather flight jacket, the thick fleece collar pulled up tight against the chill of the altitude. Behind his dark goggles, his eyes are fixed steadily on the empty horizon. The immense, sleeping giant of an engine roars steadily just inches in front of his boots, but up here, insulated by the wind and the glass canopy, the sound is muffled. It is a steady, thrumming lullaby of raw power. Yet, despite the beautiful day and the smooth rhythm of the flight, Peter's hands grip the control stick with a quiet, tense anticipation. He knows the history of the machine he is flying. He knows the dark, whispered stories of the Widowmaker. He has seen the terrifying bounces on the wooden decks, the shattered propellers, the exhausted, haunted faces of the pilots who had miraculously survived the return to the Earth. For months, this airplane has been banished to the lonely, Coral Islands, deemed too stubborn and dangerous for the delicate dance of landing on the water. But today is different. Today, Peter is not flying an outcast. He is flying a promise. Hidden deep inside the thick steel legs of the landing gear, tucked away where neither the sun nor the wind can reach it, is the tiny, delicate valve. The simple stroke of a pen. The quiet breath of relief designed by a tired engineer in a rainy city thousands of miles away, and installed by mechanics in the dead of night. Peter cannot see the valve. He cannot hear it over the roar of the engine. He only knows that it is there, waiting in the dark oil and grease, carrying the immense weight of his own life and the hopes of every man who built the machine. He has been chosen to take this modified bird out over the deep ocean, find a waiting aircraft carrier, and test the theory in the most unforgiving environment on Earth. He reaches a gloved hand to the edge of his instrument panel. Tucked into a small gap between the dials is a black and white photograph. It is a picture of a quiet porch, a wooden rocking chair, and a young woman with a soft, warm smile. It is his wife, waiting for him in a world that feels unimaginably distant from this cold, blue sky. Peter traces the edge of the photograph with his leather-clad thumb. He thinks of the incredible chain of human hands that has led to this exact moment. He thinks of the draftsmen in their quiet rooms, drawing the elegant curves of the wings. He thinks of the metalworkers coaxing the aluminum into shape. He thinks of the quiet, unseen men who sat at cluttered desks, staring at blueprints until their eyes ached, desperately searching for a way to bring him safely back to that wooden rocking chair. He is not flying alone. He is being carried by the collective, quiet love of strangers. Far below, resting on the dark, swelling surface of the ocean, is the aircraft carrier. From Peter's altitude, it looks impossibly small, a mere splinter of gray wood adrift in a vast, indifferent sea. On the deck of that ship, hundreds of men are waiting. They wear brightly colored cloth helmets, their canvas jackets snapping in the harsh, salty wind. They stand along the edges of the flight deck, their eyes squinting up into the bright sun, searching the sky for the familiar, heavy silhouette. These men remember the tragedies. They remember pulling broken machines from the safety nets and sweeping up the shattered fragments of wood and metal. A heavy, anxious silence hangs over the ship. There is no loud chatter, no casual joking. They are holding their breath. They know that a young boy is bringing the banished machine back to their home, and they are terrified of what the heavy, unforgiving steel will do when it meets their wooden deck. The landing signal officer, a man whose quiet gestures are the only language the pilot will understand in his final moments, stands at the very stern of the ship. He holds his cloth paddles low at his sides. He looks down at the churning white water of the ship's wake, gathering his own quiet courage. He must guide a blind airplane down to a tiny, moving target. He must trust that the unseen, tiny valve will do its job. So much of the past is carried in these quiet, terrifying moments of trust. The sweeping narratives of history so often overlook the isolated seconds where everything hangs in the balance, where the courage of a single pilot or the quiet brilliance of a hidden engineer changes the course of the world. These unseen operations, these deeply human struggles, are the true fabric of the era. If you feel a gentle pull toward these forgotten stories and the secret sacrifices that took place in the shadows, I would be honored to share my free ebook with you, titled The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. You can receive it by joining my email newsletter, where we continue to explore the quiet corners of the past together. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. In the cockpit, Peter takes a deep, slow breath. The cold air fills his lungs, steadying the rapid beating of his heart. He reaches forward and gently pulls back on the heavy throttle lever. The deafening roar of the massive engine instantly softens into a low, rumbling grumble. The airplane slows, shedding its incredible speed. The howling of the wind against the glass canopy fades into a soft, rushing sigh. It is time to go down. He pushes the control stick forward, and the nose of the beautiful, dark blue bird dips toward the ocean. The carrier slowly grows larger in his windscreen, transforming from a tiny sliver into a solid, floating island of steel and wood. He can see the tiny, brightly colored figures of the men standing on the deck. He can see the white foam of the waves crashing against the hull. Peter reaches down and pulls the heavy lever to deploy the landing gear. There is a loud, mechanical clunk that reverberates through the entire airframe as the heavy steel doors open. The wind rushes violently into the wheel wells. Another deep, solid thud echoes through the cockpit as the long, steel struts lock into place beneath the bent wings. The legs are down. The machine is reaching for the earth. As Peter brings the airplane lower, the graceful, swooping dance of the flight disappears. The heavy, clumsy nature of the beast returns. The massive nose of the plane, designed to hold the sleeping giant of an engine, points upward as he slows his speed. Slowly, inevitably, the wooden deck of the carrier disappears from his view. He is blind. He is flying entirely on faith. He looks out the side window, trying to catch a glimpse of the landing signal officer. He sees the man standing on the edge of the ship, holding the bright cloth paddles against the gray canvas of the ocean. The paddles are out wide. "Keep it steady," the silent gesture says. "You are on the right path." Peter's hands are slick with sweat inside his leather gloves. He adjusts the throttle with tiny, delicate movements, listening to the subtle changes in the engine's song. He feels the heavy airplane trembling around him, fighting against the slow speed, desperate to simply fall out of the sky. The ocean rushes up to meet him. The water is no longer a distant, abstract painting. It is a moving, breathing force, deep and dark, waiting just below his wheels. He can smell the sharp, heavy scent of the salt air bleeding into the cockpit, mingling with the familiar smell of warm aviation oil. He checks his photograph one last time. The rocking chair. The warm smile. "Let me come back," he whispers into the rushing wind. "Just let me come back." He looks out at the landing signal officer. The man's paddles suddenly cross sharply over his chest. "Cut the engine." Peter's hand pulls the throttle entirely back. The massive engine falls suddenly, eerily silent. The roar is instantly replaced by the haunting, lonely whistle of the wind moving over the aluminum wings. The nose of the airplane drops. The heavy rubber tires reach out for the wooden deck. In the long, agonizing seconds of the fall, the entire world seems to stop spinning. The men on the deck freeze, their eyes wide, their breath caught tight in their chests. The mechanics in the distant hangars are completely unaware, yet their hopes are tied directly to this falling machine. The tired engineer in his quiet office rests, knowing his paper theory is now facing the ultimate, unforgiving truth of gravity. And Peter, locked inside the beautiful, dark blue cage, simply closes his eyes. He does not brace for an impact. He does not tense his shoulders to fight the violent bounce. He chooses, in this final, suspended moment, to trust the quiet kindness of the men who built the tiny valve. He lets his body go slack against the leather seat. He falls through the final few feet of the salty air, wrapped in a profound, heavy silence, holding his breath over the deep, waiting for the heavy steel to finally meet the wood. There is a single, immeasurable fraction of a second, suspended delicately between the open sky and the hard earth, where the entire world simply holds its breath. Imagine the exact moment the heavy, black rubber of the airplane's tires finally brushes against the dark, oiled wood of the flight deck. It is a moment that has historically been filled with violence. In the past, this was the instant the massive energy of the falling machine would hit the unyielding ship, creating a terrifying, explosive rejection that sent the beautiful blue bird hurtling helplessly back into the cold air. But not today. Today, the quiet magic of a tired engineer's pencil sketch is about to meet the raw, heavy iron of reality. As the wheels touch the wood, the immense, crushing weight of the giant engine pushes down with all its might. The pressure races up the thick steel struts of the landing gear, desperately searching for a way out. Inside those dark steel tubes, the thick, amber hydraulic fluid is squeezed to its absolute limit. It hits what used to be a solid wall of metal. It prepares to violently rebound. But then, in the pitch-black silence inside the metal leg, the tiny, delicate valve opens. It does not fight the pressure. It yields to it. It offers a tiny, graceful passageway, a beautiful doorway for the energy to escape. The trapped fluid slides smoothly through the opening, and instead of a violent explosion of force, the landing gear simply lets out a long, heavy, mechanical sigh. The steel legs compress smoothly, absorbing the blow. They fold just enough to cradle the immense weight of the machine, gently taking the burden of the sky and passing it softly to the deck of the ship. In the cockpit, Peter has his eyes tightly shut. His hands are still gripping the control stick, his muscles braced for the sickening, floating sensation of the bounce. He is waiting to feel the nose of the plane suddenly pitch upward into the empty air. He is waiting for the terrifying weightlessness that haunted the nightmares of every pilot who flew the Widowmaker. But the bounce never comes. Instead, Peter feels a firm, solid connection to the earth. The airplane settles. It sinks into its own weight, heavy and secure. A split second later, the heavy steel arresting hook dangling from the tail of the plane catches one of the thick cables stretched across the wooden deck. The cable pulls taut with a deep, resonant thrum that vibrates through the entire ship. The beautiful, dark blue Corsair is pulled to a rapid, but incredibly smooth, halt. And then, there is only silence. The engine has been cut. The roaring thunder is gone. The only sound left in the world is the lonely, rhythmic howling of the ocean wind blowing over the long, elegant nose of the airplane. Peter opens his eyes. He is not falling. He is not tumbling through the salty air. He is sitting perfectly still, firmly planted on the solid wooden deck of the aircraft carrier. The horizon is right where it is supposed to be. The pale blue sky stretches out peacefully above him. He lets go of the control stick. His hands are trembling, not from fear, but from the sudden, overwhelming departure of it. He reaches forward with clumsy, leather-clad fingers and gently touches the photograph tucked into his instrument panel. He traces the warm smile of his wife, sitting in her rocking chair on the quiet porch. A single, hot tear escapes the corner of his eye, cutting a clean path through the dark sweat and grease on his cheek. "I'm here," he whispers to the photograph, his voice breaking softly in the quiet of the cockpit. "I made it back." Down on the deck, the brightly colored crew had braced themselves for a disaster. They had crouched behind the safety netting, waiting for the terrible sound of shattering wood and screaming metal. But when the plane caught the wire and simply stopped, a profound, stunned silence washed over the men. For a moment, no one moves. They just stare at the beautiful blue machine resting peacefully on the deck. It looks so natural sitting there, so graceful, as if it had always belonged to the sea. Then, a young boy in a yellow cloth helmet slowly stands up. He walks tentatively toward the airplane, his eyes wide with a gentle awe. He reaches out and rests his bare hand against the cold metal of the inverted gull wing. He pats it softly, the way one might soothe a frightened horse. Suddenly, the spell breaks. The deck erupts not in loud cheers, but in a flurry of purposeful, joyful movement. Men rush forward to secure the plane. They are smiling, clapping each other on the back, shaking their heads in quiet disbelief. The curse has been broken. The beast has been tamed. They look up at Peter in the cockpit, giving him silent nods of profound respect and relief. When we hear these stories of incredible relief, of young men making it back to the deck safely against all odds, it often stirs a deep, emotional desire within us to reach out and connect with that history. We yearn to hold a piece of that resilience, or to immerse ourselves in the atmosphere of those quiet, brave days. If you feel that same gentle pull to remember and honor the past, you might find deep comfort in exploring the carefully curated World War II memorabilia available on Amazon, or perhaps dedicating a quiet evening to watching the deeply moving film Midway. It is a wonderful, grounding way to keep the spirit of these everyday heroes close to your heart. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Peter unlatches the heavy glass canopy and pushes it back. The cold, fresh ocean breeze rushes into the cramped space, washing away the smell of fear and warm oil. He slowly unbuckles his heavy canvas harness. He is exhausted, his bones aching with a deep, heavy fatigue, but his spirit feels lighter than the clouds drifting high above the ship. He climbs down the side of the fuselage, stepping carefully onto the wooden deck. As his boots touch the oiled wood, his legs nearly give out from beneath him. A burly mechanic, a man whose hands are dark with grease, catches him by the shoulder, holding him steady. "She kissed it," the mechanic murmurs, his voice thick with emotion, looking at the landing gear. "She just kissed the steel and stayed down." Peter nods, unable to find the words to speak. He turns and looks at the heavy steel strut of the landing gear. He cannot see the tiny valve inside. He cannot see the elegant flow of the amber fluid. But he feels a deep, abiding love for the unseen hands that put it there. He silently thanks the tired draftsmen, the late-night engineers, and the quiet administrators who believed in the value of a gentle return. Thousands of miles away, in a city where the streetlights are just beginning to flicker on against the gathering dusk, the telegraph office in a pale stone building begins to quietly chatter. A young operator types out a message on a yellow slip of paper. It is a very short message, coming across the vast, dark cables resting at the bottom of the ocean. He folds the paper, places it in an envelope, and walks down the quiet, echoing hallway to a familiar corner office. William, the quiet engineer who had sat in the glow of the green glass lamp, is packing up his briefcase for the evening. The rain has returned, pattering softly against his tall window panes. He looks tired. The weight of the war is a heavy coat he has worn for far too long. The operator knocks softly on the open door and hands William the envelope. William opens it slowly. He unfolds the yellow paper. There are no technical readouts. There are no graphs of hydraulic pressure or charts of descent vectors. There are only 4 typed words from the squadron commander on the ship. "The Widowmaker sleeps." William reads the words. He reads them again. He slowly lowers the paper to his desk, letting it rest next to his reading glasses. He walks over to the window and looks out at the rainy, gray city. He thinks of the tiny valve. He thinks of the dark, violent bouncing that has finally been put to rest. A slow, warm tear traces its way down his cheek, catching the pale light of the street lamps outside. He does not wipe it away. He lets it fall, a quiet offering of gratitude to the universe. He turns off the light in his office, leaving the yellow telegram resting in the dark, and for the first time in many long months, William goes home to sleep a truly dreamless, peaceful sleep. Back out on the vast Pacific, the sun is beginning to set, turning the ocean into a brilliant, shifting canvas of molten gold and deep violet. The day's flying is done. On the flight deck of the carrier, the deck crew is finishing their work. But they do not push the dark blue Corsair to the very edge of the ship to chain it in exile. They do not look at it with suspicion or fear. Instead, they gently fold the massive, magnificent inverted gull wings upward, securing them with care. They attach a small tractor to the front landing gear. Slowly, with a deep reverence, they guide the airplane toward the large, rectangular elevator in the center of the deck. The elevator lowers, taking the heavy bird down into the warm, illuminated belly of the ship. Down in the hangar deck, the air is thick with the smell of coffee and quiet conversation. Mechanics wipe the coral dust and sea salt from her metal skin. They polish her windshield until it gleams. The airplane is no longer an outcast. It is no longer banished to the coral sands or feared by the boys it was built to protect. It has been welcomed back into the fold. It has been accepted as the great, shielding fortress it was always meant to be. As night falls over the endless ocean, wrapping the solitary ship in a blanket of absolute dark, the beautiful blue machine rests quietly in the hangar. Its massive engine is cooling, ticking softly in the warm air. Its heavy steel legs stand firm and steady, holding the weight of the sky with a new, quiet grace. The curse is broken, the wind has been bent, and the magnificent, unstoppable bird is finally, truly home. Once a broken thing learns how to heal, it becomes a protector of all that is fragile. Imagine a world made entirely of water and sky. You are standing on the narrow, steel deck of a small escort ship, somewhere in the vast, unfathomable expanse of the Pacific Ocean. There is no land in sight, nor has there been for many long weeks. There is only the deep, rolling indigo of the sea beneath you, and the towering, brilliant white cathedrals of clouds above. The ocean swells are slow and rhythmic, lifting the heavy metal ship and setting it back down with the gentle, breathing pace of a sleeping giant. The air is incredibly warm, thick with the scent of crushed sea salt, wet canvas, and the faint, bitter aroma of dark coffee drifting up from the galley below. The sun beats down, reflecting off the water in a million blinding, scattered diamonds. In this endless expanse, it is so easy to feel impossibly small. It is easy to feel vulnerable, like a tiny speck of dust adrift in a universe that simply does not know you are there. On the high signal bridge of this small ship stands a young sailor named Matthew. He leans his forearms against the sun-warmed iron railing, his white canvas hat pulled low over his eyes to shield them from the glare. Matthew is no older than 20, though the sun and the salt have etched quiet, tired lines around the corners of his eyes. He spends his days scanning the endless horizon, searching the empty blue canvas for any sign of trouble, carrying the heavy burden of keeping his sleeping friends below deck safe from the unseen dangers of the deep. For many months, the sky had been a place of deep anxiety. It was a vast, open door through which sudden, terrifying storms of conflict could arrive without warning. But today, the sky sounds different. Matthew closes his eyes and listens to the gentle wind blowing past his ears. Beneath the whisper of the breeze, he hears a distant, resonant hum. It is a deep, throbbing vibration that seems to emanate not from a single point, but from the very air itself. It is a warm, steady, mechanical lullaby. He opens his eyes and looks up. High above the towering clouds, tracing slow, majestic circles in the pale blue stratosphere, are the dark silhouettes of airplanes. They are the Corsairs. Painted in the deep, bruised blue of the ocean depths, they blend seamlessly into the sky above. Their magnificent, inverted gull wings give them the graceful, swooping profile of massive seabirds. They no longer look like the heavy, clumsy widowmakers that had terrified the men on the carrier decks. They no longer look like the discarded, dusty outcasts banished to the coral sands. Because of a single, quiet stroke of a pen, because of a tiny, unseen valve hidden deep within their steel legs, the curse has been lifted. The planes are free. They have returned to the fleet, taking their rightful place high above the ships, transformed into silent, watchful guardians. To the young sailors like Matthew, staring up from the lonely decks of their tiny ships, these dark blue planes are not weapons of war. They are a roof over their heads. They are a shield made of aluminum and wind, wrapping the entire fleet in a protective embrace. Matthew watches as one of the planes dips its wings, catching the golden sunlight on its long, elegant nose. He feels a profound, deeply settling warmth spread through his chest. The tight knot of anxiety that he carries in his stomach every morning begins to loosen and melt away. He knows that as long as he can hear that deep, rhythmic hum of the massive engines above, he and his friends are safe. He reaches into the pocket of his damp uniform and pulls out a small, leather-bound notebook. It is filled with half-written letters to his younger brother, a boy who still sleeps in a quiet, safe room with a window facing a gentle grove of maple trees. Matthew uncaps his pen and begins to write, using the warm iron railing as a desk. The ocean is so very big, he writes, the ink flowing smoothly onto the soft paper. It can make you feel entirely forgotten by the world. But today, there are angels in the sky. They are painted the color of the sea, with wings that bend like the gulls back home. They fly so high they look like tiny blue stars moving through the daylight. When they are up there, roaring their steady song, I don't feel afraid of the dark water anymore. I feel like someone is watching over us, making sure we get to see tomorrow. I wish you could hear the sound they make. It is the sound of a promise kept. Matthew folds the notebook and tucks it safely away, returning his gaze to the heavens. He feels a quiet, unspoken bond with the unseen men sitting inside those cockpits. High above, wrapped in the freezing, thin air of the stratosphere, sits a pilot named Daniel. From his vantage point inside the glass canopy of the Corsair, the world is breathtakingly beautiful. The ocean below looks like a solid floor of rippled blue glass, dotted with the tiny, white wakes of the ships moving in perfect, geometric formations. The clouds are soft, white islands floating in a sea of pure, crystalline air. Daniel is wrapped in a heavy sheepskin jacket, his hands resting lightly on the control stick. The immense, powerful engine ahead of him pours warm air over his boots, keeping the biting cold at bay. He feels entirely at peace. The terror of the landing, the agonizing fear of the bounce, has vanished from his mind like a bad dream in the morning light. Because he knows he can trust the machine to bring him safely back to the wooden deck, he is finally free to simply fly. He is free to focus his entire heart on protecting the tiny, fragile ships slowly carving their way through the water below. He looks down through the reinforced glass and spots the tiny shape of Matthew's escort ship, looking no larger than a child's forgotten toy left in a vast puddle. Daniel knows that down there, young men are looking up at him. He knows they are relying on his tired eyes, his steady hands, and the magnificent strength of his bent-winged bird to keep the shadows away. Daniel gently pushes the control stick, banking the heavy plane into a slow, lazy arc. He imagines the faces of the sailors. He imagines their families waiting for them on quiet porches, and dusty farmhouses, and in bustling, rainy cities. He feels an overwhelming surge of protective love for these men he has never met. He is their silent shepherd, guiding them through the valley of the deep. History often tries to polish these moments, to smooth over the raw, exhausted humanity of the past with neat narratives and triumphant brass music. But the true story is found in the quiet, unvarnished spaces between those polished pages. It is found in the sweat on a young sailor's brow, the grease on a mechanic's hands, and the profound, deeply felt relief of a pilot who finally trusts his machine. If you feel drawn to looking directly into the eyes of that history, to witnessing the unblurred, deeply human realities of those days, I have carefully gathered a collection of unseen, raw media from the war. It is a digital archive of images and videos over on my Gumroad, showing the true, uncensored faces of the men and machines that shaped our world, moments too real and unfiltered to be shown here. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As the long afternoon slowly surrenders to the evening, the character of the sky begins to change. The brilliant, blinding blue softens into a deeply melancholic shade of violet. The towering white clouds take on the color of bruised peaches and dark gold, casting long, purple shadows across the darkening surface of the ocean. The air cools. The wind settles into a soft, whispering breeze. Down on the ships, the men begin to prepare for the night. They secure the heavy metal hatches, turning off the bright deck lights so the fleet can vanish into the safety of the dark. The smell of dinner wafts across the water, a comforting, domestic scent in an entirely foreign place. High above, Daniel knows his patrol is coming to an end. His fuel gauge is dipping low, and the shadows are growing long. He takes one last, slow circle over the fleet. He wants to leave them with a feeling of absolute safety before he returns to his floating home. He dips his heavy, blue wings left, and then right, a silent, graceful salute to the men looking up from the darkening waves. Sleep well, the gesture says. We will be here again tomorrow. He pulls back on the throttle, the deafening roar of the engine softening into a gentle, throbbing sigh, and begins his long, slow descent toward the tiny wooden deck of the aircraft carrier waiting far below. He does not feel the tightening in his chest anymore. He does not feel the cold sweat of fear. He only feels the warm anticipation of a hot cup of coffee and the quiet camaraderie of the wardroom. Down on the small escort ship, Matthew stands on the signal bridge and watches the Blue Angels slowly descend from the heavens. He watches until they are swallowed by the violet twilight, their deep engine hum fading into the rhythmic, crashing lullaby of the ocean waves against the hull of the ship. The first stars begin to prick through the velvet darkness of the sky, tiny silver pinpricks of light guiding the world toward sleep. Matthew pulls his collar up against the evening chill. He feels a profound, beautiful exhaustion settling into his bones. The day is done, and the sky remained quiet. The storm was held back by the magnificent, bent-winged birds. He climbs down the steep, metal ladders into the warm, dimly lit belly of the ship. He walks through the narrow, echoing corridors to his small, canvas bunk. As he lays his head down on his thin pillow, he can feel the gentle, rocking motion of the ocean, a soothing, swaying rhythm that pulls him toward dreams of home. Outside, the great fleet continues its slow, steady journey across the endless water, entirely cloaked in the deep, protective dark of the night. On the decks of the carriers, the magnificent Corsairs rest quietly, their massive engines clicking softly as they cool in the salty air. Their heavy steel legs stand firm, having gracefully kissed the wooden decks upon their return, carrying the secret of the tiny valve within them. They are no longer just machines. They have become the trusted companions of the lonely sea, the beautiful, silent guardians of the Pacific sky, watching over 1,000 sleeping dreamers until the sun rises to break the dark once more. Words written in the quiet spaces between the clouds have a way of carrying the heaviest truths safely back to the earth. Imagine, if you will, the incredibly intimate, incredibly tiny world of a fighter cockpit, suspended thousands of feet above the vast and rolling Pacific Ocean. Up here, the air is so thin and cold that it would steal your breath away in seconds, but inside this small enclosure of glass and aluminum, there is a strange, profound warmth. The air smells of rich aviation fuel, the deep, earthy scent of worn leather, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone. The glass canopy is a fragile bubble, separating a fragile human being from the unforgiving edge of the stratosphere. At the center of this small, suspended universe sits a young man named Samuel. He is wrapped in a heavy, fleece-lined flight suit, his hands resting gently on the control stick. In front of him, glowing with a soft, pale green luminescence in the fading afternoon light, are the dials and gauges that tell him the heartbeat of his machine. And stretching out far ahead of the glass, dominating his entire view, is the massive, magnificent nose of the Corsair. Before the tiny valve was placed inside the landing gear, this cockpit was a place of high anxiety. It was a cage where young men sat with tight shoulders and clenched jaws, listening to the roar of the massive engine and dreading the moment they would have to return to the wooden decks below. The airplane had been a brilliant but terrifying stranger, a widowmaker that fought against the earth. But today, high above the clouds, Samuel's hands are relaxed. The tension has melted from his shoulders. The deep, thrumming vibration of the massive engine travels through the metal floorboards, up through the thick soles of his boots, and into his chest, but it does not feel like a threat anymore. It feels like the steady, comforting purr of a giant, protective guardian. Because of the quiet genius of the engineers back home, because of a tiny modification that allowed the airplane to finally yield to the deck, Samuel has fallen deeply, quietly in love with his machine. He reaches a thick, gloved hand up to the breast pocket of his leather jacket. Tucked safely inside, pressed directly over his own beating heart, is a folded piece of paper. It is a letter. Not an official military document, not a map of the ocean, but a quiet, fragile letter he has been writing in his head for hours, waiting for the moment he lands so he can put pen to paper. In a world consumed by the loud, metallic thunder of global conflict, these letters are the soft, vital lifelines that keep the men tethered to their humanity. They are whispered confessions of fear, quiet declarations of hope, and beautiful, poetic observations of a world seen from above. When Samuel touches the paper through the leather of his jacket, he thinks of his mother, sitting at the kitchen table in a small, quiet house thousands of miles away. My dearest mother, the letter in his mind begins, the words rolling in time with the gentle rhythm of the engine. You would not believe the colors of the world up here. When the sun begins to set, the clouds turn into mountains of crushed gold and violet, so beautiful and so vast that they make me forget, just for a moment, why I am up here at all. I want you to know that you do not need to worry for me quite so much anymore. They have fixed my beautiful blue bird. She is no longer the frightening thing she used to be. When we come down from the sky now, she does not fight the ship. She sighs, heavy and tired, and she settles onto the wood as gently as a leaf falling on the lawn. She is taking very good care of me, Mother. She is keeping your boy safe. This was the secret, unseen transformation of the Corsair. The mechanical fix did not just change the airplane, it changed the men who flew it. It gave them back their peace of mind. It allowed them to look at the deep blue wings not with suspicion, but with a profound, romantic affection. The airplanes became their silent partners. In the letters sent home in canvas bags across the ocean, the young pilots wrote about their machines as if they were living, breathing companions. They gave them names, painting them in careful, looping letters beneath the cockpits. They spoke of the deep roar of the engine as a comforting lullaby that sang them to sleep on long patrols. They wrote about the smell of the oil as if it were a familiar, domestic perfume. There is a letter kept in a dusty archive, written by a pilot named Thomas to his young wife. In it, he describes the strange, beautiful intimacy of flying through a rainstorm over the sea. The rain hits the glass like 1,000 tiny fingertips, Thomas wrote. The world goes completely gray, and you feel entirely alone. But then, I look out at those long, bent wings, shaking just slightly in the wind, holding me up. I can feel the strength of the metal fighting the storm for me. I rest my hand on the cold aluminum of the fuselage, and I swear to you, my darling, I can feel her humming back to me. It is a partnership. I give her the sky, and in return, she promises to give me back to you. We are going to make it through this storm, the two of us, so I can come home and sit with you on the porch again. It is a profound honor to sit in the quiet of the night and read these delicate, whispered letters to you, to help keep these fragile memories alive. But unearthing these deeply personal stories, finding the quiet human voices hidden beneath the roaring machinery of history, requires countless hours of gentle, patient research through forgotten archives and old, dusty boxes. If you find comfort in these quiet moments of humanity, and if you would like to help support the deep, late-night research that brings these whispers back to the light, I have set up a Ko-Fi page where you can leave a small tip, even just a single $1, to help keep this journey going. It is a wonderful way to join this community of history lovers. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. As Samuel's patrol nears its end, the sky around him deepens into the velvety, melancholic purple of twilight. The ocean below turns completely black, an endless, unknowable void. It is the time of day when loneliness can easily creep into the edges of the mind, when the vastness of the world feels almost too heavy to bear. But Samuel is not alone. He looks down at his instrument panel. Tucked into the edge of the compass housing is a different kind of letter. This one is not written on fine stationery, and it is not going across the ocean. It is a torn scrap of brown paper, stained with the dark thumbprint of engine grease. It is a note from his mechanic, a quiet, older man who spends his nights entirely covered in the dirt and oil of the ship's belly. Before Samuel took off that afternoon, the mechanic had handed him the scrap of paper, patting him awkwardly on the shoulder before disappearing back into the shadows of the hangar deck. Samuel reaches out and unfolds the rough paper. The handwriting is blocky and uneven, written by hands that are more accustomed to turning heavy steel wrenches than holding delicate pens. Tuned the carburetors, the note reads. She is breathing pure and clean today. Added a little extra padding to your seat cushion, too. The left strut is holding pressure beautifully. Don't you worry about the deck, kid. Bring her down smooth. I'll be waiting with a hot cup of coffee. Godspeed. It is just a few sentences scribbled on a piece of trash, but to Samuel, in the freezing, lonely air of the twilight, it is the most beautiful thing in the world. It is a reminder of the invisible, unbreakable threads that connect him to the earth. He is suspended between the stars and the sea, wrapped in a shell of metal, but he is held up by the quiet love of the men below. The relationship between the pilot and the mechanic was the deepest, most unspoken bond of the war. Before the landing gear was fixed, this relationship had been strained by a quiet, terrible guilt. The mechanics had felt utterly helpless, watching their boys climb into an airplane they knew could suddenly, violently bounce out of control upon return. They had wiped the oil and tightened the bolts, praying it would be enough, but knowing the machine possessed a fundamental flaw they could not repair with their hands alone. But now, because of the tiny bleed valve, that guilt has been entirely washed away. The mechanics can finally hand the airplane over with a pure, unburdened heart. They know that if the engine runs true, the landing gear will catch their pilot and hold him safe. The scrap of brown paper is not just a maintenance report, it is a quiet celebration of trust. Samuel gently folds the brown paper and tucks it back next to the compass. He pushes the control stick forward, beginning his long, slow descent toward the sleeping ocean. He can see the aircraft carrier far below, a tiny, glowing sliver of light cutting through the pitch-black water. It looks incredibly small, but as he points the massive nose of the Corsair toward it, he feels no dread. He pulls back the throttle. The mighty roar of the engine softens into a deep, hollow sigh. The wind begins to whistle over the long, elegant curves of the inverted gull wings. He lowers the landing gear. He hears the heavy, reassuring clunk as the steel legs lock into place. He knows what waits inside those dark tubes. He knows the tiny, brilliant valve is resting in the oil, waiting to do its quiet work. He guides the heavy machine down through the darkness, following the silent, waving paddles of the landing signal officer. He crosses over the edge of the ship. He cuts the engine entirely. The heavy plane drops through the final few feet of salty air. The rubber tires strike the wooden deck. There is a soft, deep, hissing sound as the hydraulic fluid pushes through the tiny valve, absorbing the massive impact. The heavy steel legs bend, gracefully accepting the weight of the sky. The airplane settles onto the wood with a heavy, peaceful thud. The tail hook catches the wire, and Samuel is pulled smoothly, safely to a stop. He sits in the quiet cockpit for a moment, listening to the cooling ticks of the massive engine. He rests his forehead against the cold glass of the canopy, letting out a long, trembling breath of pure relief. He is home. Down on the deck, men rush forward, but they are not running to a disaster. They are running to unhook the cables, to guide the beautiful blue bird into the safety of the hangar. Among them is the older mechanic, wiping his dark hands on a rag, smiling a quiet, deeply tired smile as he watches Samuel slide the canopy back. Later that night, sitting in the dim, red light of the ship's wardroom, Samuel finally takes out his pen. The ship is rocking gently in the dark swells of the Pacific. The room smells of old coffee and damp wool. He smooths the piece of paper out on the table. He thinks of the soft, golden light of the instrument panel. He thinks of the majestic, bent wings holding back the storm. He thinks of the tiny, unseen valve that absorbed the violence of the world so he could sit here in peace. He begins to write, his hand moving smoothly across the page, pouring his heart out to the mother waiting on the porch, knowing that because of the quiet genius of a few men back home, his letter will not be the last. He writes to tell her of the gentle giants of the sky, of the whispers in the oil, and of the profound, simple joy of feeling the earth softly rise up to catch him one more time. Even in the deepest dark, hope sometimes announces itself not with a shout, but with a long, haunting sigh. Imagine a jungle so dense and overgrown that it seems to swallow the very concept of daylight. You are far away from the clean, wooden decks of the aircraft carriers and the open, endless blue of the stratosphere. Down here, the world is made entirely of damp earth, giant, heavy ferns, and the relentless, suffocating humidity of the tropics. The air smells of wet decay, crushed leaves, and the metallic tang of rain that never truly seems to stop falling. It is a place that feels entirely disconnected from the rest of the turning world. In the middle of this dark, tangled forest, a group of young men sit quietly in the mud. They are infantrymen, soldiers who have spent weeks marching through the unforgiving terrain. Their olive drab uniforms are soaked through, heavy with the weight of the rain and the earth. They lean against the thick trunks of ancient trees, their canvas helmets pulled low over their tired eyes. When night falls in the jungle, it does not fall gently. It drops like a heavy, velvet curtain, plunging the world into a blackness so complete that you cannot see your own hand resting on your knee. In that kind of profound, isolating dark, the mind begins to play tricks. Every snapping twig sounds like a threat. Every rustle of the wind through the broad leaves feels like a shadow creeping closer. The young men sit in silence, holding their breath, waiting for the long, terrifying night to finally surrender to the dawn. They are exhausted, far from home, and they feel incredibly alone. But then, rising above the rhythmic drumming of the rain, a new sound begins to weave its way through the thick canopy of the trees. It is a faint sound at first, easy to mistake for the wind howling through a narrow canyon. But as the seconds pass, it grows. It does not sound like the deep, throbbing roar of a traditional airplane engine. It is not the harsh, mechanical clatter of pistons and exhaust. It is a high, mournful, rushing wail. It sounds like the sky itself is taking a deep, rushing breath. This is the beautiful, unintended music of the bent-winged bird. When the draftsmen in their quiet, yellow-lit rooms designed the Corsair, they had to find a place to put the air intakes for the oil coolers. They decided to place small, rectangular openings right at the roots of the wings, exactly where the aluminum bends gracefully down toward the earth. They did not realize they were building an instrument. When the heavy, blue airplane dives toward the ground, or when it flies at a high speed through the humid air, the wind rushes violently into those small openings. The air tears across the metal edges, vibrating and howling, creating a high-pitched shriek. To those who did not understand it, to the forces hiding in the jungle below, the sound was terrifying. It was an otherworldly wail falling from the clouds, a sound that promised sudden and overwhelming destruction. They gave the unseen airplane a dark, poetic name. They called it the Whistling Death. But to the young men sitting in the mud, leaning against the wet bark of the trees, that haunting whistle was not the sound of death at all. It was the most beautiful music in the world. A young soldier named Michael sits in a shallow, waterlogged foxhole, wrapping a dry piece of canvas over his radio equipment. He pauses, tilting his head up toward the invisible canopy of the trees. He hears the rushing, sighing wail cutting through the dark. A slow, tired smile spreads across his mud-streaked face. He closes his eyes and lets out a long, heavy breath. The tight, painful knot of anxiety that had been resting in his chest all night finally begins to loosen. He reaches over and gently taps the shoulder of the boy sleeping next to him. "Listen," Michael whispers in the dark. "The big blue birds are up there. They're looking out for us." The boy stirs, opening his eyes to the pitch-black night. He listens to the haunting whistle fading into the distance and simply nods, pulling his damp wool blanket a little tighter around his shoulders. He falls back to sleep almost immediately, wrapped in a sudden, profound sense of safety. The sound of the Corsair was a promise. It was a mechanical lullaby that told the lonely men on the ground that they had not been forgotten. It told them that high above the suffocating canopy, where the air was cold and pure, someone was awake. Someone was watching over them, tracing slow, protective circles in the dark, using their massive, untouchable strength to keep the shadows at bay. The history of these incredible machines is so often told through the lens of polished metal, triumphant battles, and sweeping global strategies. But the true, emotional core of this era lives down in the mud. It lives in the desperate, quiet terror of a jungle night, and the profound, deeply human relief brought by a simple, rushing sound in the sky. These uncensored, unvarnished experiences are the real fabric of the past. If you find yourself wanting to look beyond the veil of traditional history, to hear the raw accounts and explore the deeply human, unfiltered reality of these times, I invite you to join our Patreon community. There, we share free podcasts, deep dives, and uncensored stories that bring these quiet, everyday heroes to life. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. High above the rain clouds, the world is entirely different. The sky is a vast, calm ocean of stars, brilliant and unchanging. The moon casts a pale, silver glow over the tops of the clouds, making them look like a soft, rolling landscape of snow. A pilot named William sits in the warm, dimly lit cockpit of his Corsair. He is insulated from the damp, freezing cold of the altitude by his heavy sheepskin jacket and the gentle heat pouring backward from the massive engine. He feels the steady, comforting thrum of the machine vibrating through his boots. But a strange truth of the Whistling Death is that the man creating the sound cannot actually hear it. Inside the enclosed glass canopy, sitting directly behind the deafening roar of the massive cylinders, William is entirely deaf to the haunting, rushing sigh his airplane is projecting down to the earth. To him, the plane simply sounds like heavy, driving thunder. Yet, he knows the song his airplane sings. Tucked carefully into the edge of his flight suit is a letter. It is a wrinkled, slightly water-stained piece of paper that was handed to him weeks ago on the Coral airstrip. It was written by an infantryman he had never met, sent back to the airfield with a supply truck. William knows the words by heart. He recites them softly to himself in the quiet of the cockpit, his voice barely a whisper against the low roar of the engine. To the boys in the blue birds, the letter said, "You have no idea how dark it gets down here under the trees. Sometimes, the quiet is so heavy it feels like it is crushing you. But then, we hear you. We hear that high, whistling sound coming through the clouds. It sounds like the wind tearing through the screen door back home in Kansas. It is the best sound in the whole world. When we hear you whistling, we know we can finally close our eyes and sleep. Thank you for keeping the night away. William rests his gloved hand gently on the control stick. He feels a profound, heavy sense of responsibility, but it is not the terrifying burden the Widowmaker used to carry. It is a burden of love. He knows that his airplane is no longer just a machine made of aluminum and steel. It has become a symbol. He gently pushes the control stick forward, pointing the long, elegant nose of the airplane slightly downward to gather speed. He wants them to hear him. He wants the wind to rush into those small openings at the roots of the wings, tearing across the metal and creating the high, wailing sigh. He pictures the young men sitting in the dark, wet jungle below. He imagines them looking up at the invisible sky, listening. "I'm here," William whispers to the empty, starry night. "Rest now. I've got you." The heavy blue airplane carves a smooth, graceful path through the silver moonlight. It is a guardian angel made of fire and iron, carrying the hopes of thousands of frightened boys upon its broad, bent wings. Down below, the rain continues to fall. The drops patter softly against the broad green leaves and the canvas tents. But the oppressive, terrifying weight of the darkness has been broken. The men sit in their shallow foxholes, sharing quiet, tired smiles. They pass a tin cup of cold coffee between them, listening to the beautiful, rushing whistle circling endlessly above their heads. They do not know about the late-night engineers, or the tiny valve that saved the airplane from banishment. They do not know about the quiet hands that hammered the aluminum, or the letters written in the quiet offices back home. They only know that when the world is at its darkest, when all hope seems entirely lost to the shadows, the sky takes a long, rushing breath and sings them safely through the night. As the hours drift slowly toward dawn, the haunting whistle gradually fades, blending into the gentle sound of the morning wind. The blue bird turns back toward the sea, heading home to the wooden decks that will warmly, softly receive it. And in the jungle, the young men finally let their heavy eyes close, sleeping peacefully beneath the invisible, protective wings of a machine that had learned how to turn the terrifying air into a lullaby of profound, abiding peace. There is a quiet miracle that happens when cold metal is touched long enough by human hands. It begins to hold a heartbeat of its own. Imagine the sprawling, wooden deck of an aircraft carrier just as the day is beginning to surrender to the evening. The sky is a vast, watercolor canvas of bruised purple and burning gold, reflecting off the dark, restless surface of the Pacific Ocean. The wind over the deck is strong and steady, carrying the sharp, clean scent of salt and the heavy, familiar perfume of warm aviation oil. A magnificent, dark blue Corsair rolls slowly to a halt near the edge of the flight deck. The massive engine gives one final, deep, shuddering cough before falling entirely silent. The great propeller blades, which just moments ago were a blinding, invisible blur of power, slowly click to a stop, casting long, elegant shadows across the oiled wood. Inside the cockpit, a young pilot named Thomas sits perfectly still. He does not immediately push back the glass canopy. He simply closes his eyes and lets out a long, trembling breath. He listens to the symphony of the cooling machine around him. The hot metal of the engine block ticks and pings softly in the cool ocean air. It is a gentle, rhythmic sound, like the exhausted panting of a loyal hound that has just run a great distance to bring its master safely home. Thomas reaches up with a tired, heavy hand and unlatches the canopy. He slides it back, and the sudden rush of the ocean breeze washes over his face, cooling the damp sweat on his forehead. He slowly pulls off his thick leather gloves. His bare hands are pale and shaking slightly, vulnerable and soft against the heavy, unyielding machinery that surrounds him. This is the profound, terrifying contrast of the sky. The fragile, beating heart of a young man, encased in a heavy shell of aluminum and steel. As Thomas climbs down the side of the fuselage, his boots finding the familiar footholds in the metal, he does not just walk away. He never just walks away. He pauses, his feet firmly on the wooden deck, and reaches out to place his bare palm flat against the long, curved nose of the airplane. The metal is incredibly warm. It radiates a deep, comforting heat. Thomas stands there in the fading light, his flesh pressed against the aluminum, feeling a profound, unspoken gratitude. He had asked this machine to carry him through a terrifying sky. He had asked it to shield him from the storm. And the machine, cured of its terrible bounce, had carried him faithfully, settling onto the deck with a heavy, gentle sigh. "Thank you," Thomas whispers into the sea breeze, his voice so soft it is instantly carried away by the wind. Waiting just a few steps away in the shadows of the deck is an older mechanic named Walter. Walter wears a faded canvas cap and a denim shirt that has been washed so many times it feels as soft as a blanket. His hands are a map of his devotion. They are scarred from slipping wrenches, calloused from lifting heavy iron, and permanently stained with the dark, indelible ink of grease and hydraulic fluid. Walter approaches the airplane not as a piece of military equipment, but as a living, breathing entity that has been entrusted to his care. He and Thomas share a quiet look. There are no salutes. There is no loud chatter. There is only a slow, deeply respectful nod between the two men. It is an exchange of profound trust. Thomas is handing the life of the machine back to Walter, and Walter is silently promising to make it whole again before the sun rises. Walter steps up to the airplane as Thomas walks away toward the warm, dimly lit corridors of the ship. The mechanic pulls a soft cloth from his back pocket. He begins to wipe away the thin film of salt spray and oil from the deep blue paint. His movements are slow, rhythmic, and incredibly gentle. As he works his way down the side of the fuselage, he crouches low, bringing himself eye level with the heavy steel struts of the landing gear. He looks at the thick metal tubes. He cannot see the tiny, brilliant valve hidden inside, but he knows it is there. He knows that this tiny piece of engineered poetry is the only reason Thomas is walking to the wardroom for a hot cup of coffee instead of being pulled from a tangled, broken wreck. Walter reaches out and rests his rough, oil-stained hand against the steel leg. He thinks of the invisible man who designed it. He does not know William's name. He does not know about the quiet, rainy office or the green glass desk lamp thousands of miles away. But in the quiet intimacy of the flight deck, Walter feels a deep, spiritual kinship with that distant mind. They are partners, separated by oceans but bound tightly together by this beautiful machine. The engineer had provided the quiet thought, and Walter provides the calloused hands to keep that thought alive. This deep, unspoken tapestry of shared survival, the pilot, the mechanic, and the distant engineer, is the true, beating heart of this era. It is a web of quiet reliance, where everyday heroism is not found in grand, sweeping gestures, but in the meticulous tightening of a bolt, the careful drafting of a blueprint, and the gentle touch of a hand against warm aluminum. These unseen operations, these quiet acts of devotion that never make the headlines, are the stories that hold the most profound weight. If you feel a gentle pull to explore the shadows of the past, to learn about the unseen operations that took place far away from the flashing cameras and the grand speeches, I would be honored to share my free ebook with you. It is called The Shadow War: 5 Top Secret Operations That Shaped World War II. You can receive it by joining my email newsletter, where we take quiet, weekly deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The sky deepens from purple to a rich, velvety black. The stars emerge, tiny pinpricks of silver light scattered across the endless canvas of the night. Down in the hangar deck, bathed in the warm, artificial glow of the yellow bulkhead lights, Walter continues his work. The hangar is a cavern of quiet industry. The air hums with the low murmurs of other mechanics, the soft clinking of tools, and the soothing, distant hum of the ship's own massive engines deep below their feet. Walter is checking the spark plugs of the sleeping giant. He works with a delicate precision that belies his rough appearance. He knows that a single grain of sand, a single over-tightened thread, could mean the difference between life and death for Thomas tomorrow. The vulnerability of human flesh is entirely dependent on the perfection of this aluminum. He pauses, wiping his brow with the back of his forearm, and looks at the plane. It is a beautiful, terrifying paradox. The machine is built of cold, unfeeling metal. It has no soul, no memory, no ability to love or fear. Yet, it absorbs the humanity of the men who surround it. It carries the terrified sweat of the pilot in the leather of its seat. It carries the devoted, aching muscles of the mechanic in the gleam of its polished cowling. It carries the quiet, desperate hope of the engineer in the very fluid that runs through its veins. Flesh and aluminum, woven together so tightly that you can no longer tell where the man ends and the machine begins. Later that night, long after his shift has ended, Walter sits on a wooden crate in the corner of the hangar. The space has grown quiet. Most of the men have gone to their bunks to chase a few hours of sleep. Walter rests a small piece of heavy, lined paper on his knee. He holds a stubby wooden pencil in his stained fingers. He is writing a letter to his wife. He does not write about the fear of the open ocean. He does not write about the deafening noise of the takeoffs. The boys bring the planes back to me, Walter writes, his handwriting slow and careful. And they look so tired, Mary. They look so incredibly young. But when they touch the metal of the wings before they walk away, I see it. I see how much they love these machines. It is my job to make sure the machines love them back. I spend my nights wiping the salt from the aluminum, making sure every wire is singing the right tune. It is strange to care for a piece of iron as if it were a child, but that is what we do here. Because we know that this cold metal is the only thing wrapping around our boys, keeping the dark away. He folds the letter carefully, making sure his greasy thumbprints do not smudge the words, and tucks it into his pocket. He looks up one last time at the long line of dark blue Corsairs resting in the dim light of the hangar. They look majestic. They look peaceful. Their massive, bent wings are folded upward, as if they are resting their heavy arms after a long day's labor. Walter stands up, feeling the familiar, dull ache in his lower back. He walks slowly past the row of airplanes, his hand casually brushing against the smooth, cool aluminum of their sides. It is a gesture of pure, unconditional affection. The metal is no longer warm. It has settled into the temperature of the night. But as Walter touches it, he knows that beneath the paint, beneath the hard steel and the complicated wiring, the machine is holding a promise. Tomorrow, the sun will rise again over the endless water. The quiet flight deck will explode into a chaotic ballet of roaring engines and rushing wind. The fragile, beating hearts of the young men will once again climb into the metal cages, and the heavy, blue birds will throw themselves into the sky. And because of the tired mechanic wiping down the fuselage, because of the young pilot who trusts the wings, and because of the quiet, distant engineer who taught the heavy steel how to yield, the flesh and the aluminum will continue their beautiful, delicate dance. They will protect each other, sustaining each other, until the roaring skies finally quiet down, and every last one of them can safely go home. There is a heavy, surreal kind of silence that arrives the moment a great storm finally decides to break. Imagine a vast, open field stretching out beneath a pale, autumn sky. The wild grass has grown tall, swaying gently in a cool, dry breeze that carries the comforting scent of pine needles, damp earth, and the very first, subtle hints of winter. There are no sirens here. There is no roaring thunder of engines, no frantic shouts of men rushing across a wooden deck, and no terrifying, whistling wind tearing through the humid jungle canopy. Here, parked in long, endless rows that disappear over the gentle curve of the horizon, are the magnificent, dark blue birds. The Corsairs. But they are entirely still. The massive engines are cold, the oil drained from their heavy iron hearts. The great propeller blades, which once spun with such blinding, invisible power, now sit perfectly motionless, casting long, still shadows across the dry earth. They are no longer the terrifying widowmakers of the early days, nor are they the roaring guardians of the Pacific sky. They are simply empty machines, resting in a quiet field, their great, bent wings shielding nothing but the tall grass growing beneath them. The war has ended. The great, global storm has finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world that feels incredibly fragile and strangely quiet. Walking slowly down the narrow aisles between the sleeping machines is a man named Julian. You might remember Julian. He was the young pilot with the quiet, steady eyes who first took the terrifying, trembling prototype into the morning mist so many years ago. Now, he is older. The heavy leather flight jacket he wears is worn soft at the elbows, the thick fleece collar thinning from years of use. His face carries the quiet, invisible weight of a man who has seen the world at its most chaotic and has somehow survived to see it become peaceful again. He runs his bare hand along the cold, unyielding aluminum of a massive, inverted gull wing. The deep-sea blue paint has begun to fade, bleached by the relentless sun and kissed by the first, faint traces of brown rust along the iron rivets. Julian stops beside the heavy steel strut of the landing gear. He looks at the thick metal tube. He knows that hidden deep inside, resting in the dark, is the tiny, delicate valve that changed everything. The quiet breath of relief designed by a tired engineer in a distant, rainy city. That tiny valve will never be tested again. It will never have to absorb the terrifying, falling weight of the sky. Its work is finally done. He leans his back against the massive, solid rubber of the airplane's tire, slowly sliding down until he is sitting in the tall, dry grass. He closes his eyes and listens to the wind. It whistles softly as it moves over the empty cowlings and the open-air intakes. It is not the haunting, rushing wail of the whistling death. It is just the gentle wind, wandering harmlessly through an empty, peaceful house. The hardest part of the piece, Julian has found, is learning how to exist in the quiet. For years, his life, and the lives of thousands of other young men, were dictated by the deafening roar of engines, the sudden shrieks of alarms, and the heavy, rhythmic thud of adrenaline. They had learned how to sleep in the mud, how to write letters in the freezing dark, and how to trust a machine with their very lives. Now, they have returned to a world of quiet front porches, ticking clocks, and the gentle rustle of newspapers. It is a beautiful world, but it is a world they no longer entirely know how to fit into. He pulls a small, worn notebook from his breast pocket. It is the same pocket where he used to keep the handwritten note from his sister. Now, he writes his own letters. Not to send across an ocean, but to empty his heavy mind, to pour the memories onto the paper so he does not have to carry them all by himself. The silence is so very loud, Julian writes, his stubby pencil moving slowly across the soft paper. It rings in the ears. I look at these beautiful, resting birds, and I feel a strange, aching guilt that I get to sit here in the autumn sun while so many of the boys did not come back to see the leaves turn golden. We spent so long trying to survive the sky, we forgot how to walk on the earth. But when I touch the cold metal of these wings, I remember the mechanics in the dark hangars. I remember the men who fixed our broken landing gear. I remember the immense, quiet love that went into keeping us alive. I am trying to learn how to be gentle again, the way they taught this airplane how to be gentle. Thousands of miles away, in a quiet, dusty workshop bathed in the warm, amber light of a single desk lamp, another man is also learning how to live in the peace. Arthur, the silver-haired metalworker who had gently tapped the very first aluminum sheets into the elegant curve of the inverted gull wing, stands at his wooden bench. The massive, heavy bucks used to shape the airplane parts are gone, disassembled, and hauled away. The sharp scent of aviation fuel has been replaced by the sweet, earthy aroma of shaved pine and beeswax. Arthur is not holding his heavy metalworking mallet. He is holding a piece of fine sandpaper, gently smoothing the curved wooden armrest of a rocking chair. He is building it for his nephew, the young boy who had written to him from the naval base, the boy who had safely returned from the vast oceans. As Arthur rubs the soft wood, his hands moving with the same slow, sweeping grace they used to shape the wings of the Corsair, he feels a profound, settling peace. He had spent years bending the wind to build a shield of aluminum. Now, he is building a place for a tired man to rest. The transition is slow, and his calloused hands still remember the heavy shock of the hammer, but with every gentle stroke of the sandpaper, the noisy war fades a little further into the past. In these quiet, rust-covered fields and dusty, amber-lit workshops, the polished, triumphant history of the world melts away, leaving only the profound, melancholic reality of the human heart. We look back at these resting machines not as mere weapons, but as silent witnesses to a generation's sacrifice, survival, and quiet resilience. When we stand in the presence of such history, even from a distance, we often feel a deep, gentle urge to connect with it. We want to hold a tangible piece of that quiet strength in our own hands, or surround ourselves with the stories of that era to ensure they are never forgotten. If you feel that same peaceful pull to honor the past, you might find deep comfort in exploring the beautiful World War II memorabilia available on Amazon, or perhaps dedicating a quiet, reflective evening to watching a moving film like Midway. It is a wonderful way to keep these memories breathing in your own home. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. Back in the quiet field, Julian folds his notebook and slides it back into his jacket pocket. He looks down the long row of resting airplanes, their silhouettes beginning to blur in the fading afternoon light. He knows that eventually, these fields will be cleared. The world will move on. The aluminum will be carefully disassembled, melted down, and turned into the quiet, domestic architecture of a world at peace. The great, roaring engines will be repurposed or simply fade into scrap. The magnificent, bent wings will disappear from the sky, leaving only the photographs and the whispered stories behind. But for now, in this suspended moment of autumn twilight, they are allowed to rest. They are monuments to the quiet minds that designed them in rainy offices, the tired, oil-stained hands that built them in cavernous hangars, and the brave, terrified hearts that flew them over the deep. The sun begins to dip lower, painting the horizon in deep, bruised shades of violet and burning orange. The fading blue paint of the airplanes takes on a warm, almost luminous glow in the twilight. The tall grass turns to spun gold. Julian stands up, brushing the dry earth from his trousers. He walks to the front of the Corsair. He reaches out and gives the massive, cold propeller blade a gentle, affectionate pat. It is a silent goodbye. It is a letting go of the heavy weight he has carried on his shoulders for so long. He does not need the machine to protect him anymore. He is finally safe. Sleep well, he whispers to the silent rows of blue, his voice carrying softly on the evening breeze. He turns his back on the boneyard and begins the long, slow walk toward the edge of the field. In the distance, the warm, yellow lights of a small town are beginning to flicker on against the gathering dark. Smoke is drifting lazily from a stone chimney, promising a hot meal and a warm fire. The war is over. The terrifying Widowmaker has become a peaceful relic of the past. And the magnificent, bent-winged birds sit quietly in the rustling grass, their long watch finally ended, silently watching the stars slowly emerge over a world that has finally learned how to breathe again. Even when the thunder finally fades into memory, the sky never truly forgets the shape of the wings that kept it safe. Imagine a quiet, sunlit room, many long and peaceful decades after the great storms over the oceans have finally exhausted themselves. The heavy, dark curtains of the past have been drawn back, allowing the warm, golden light of a late autumn afternoon to spill across a worn wooden floor. Dust motes drift lazily in the sunbeams, suspended in the absolute stillness of the present moment. The room smells of old paper, polished mahogany, and the faint, sweet aroma of peppermint tea cooling in a porcelain cup. Sitting in a comfortable armchair near the window is an old man. His hands are delicate now, mapped with the pale blue veins of age and spotted with the passage of time. He wears a soft, knitted cardigan, and his breathing is slow, matching the rhythmic, soothing ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. This is William. The quiet mind. The engineer who, in the dark and lonely hours of a rainy night so many years ago, looked at a piece of drafting paper and decided to teach a machine of iron and fire how to finally yield to the earth. William reaches out to a small table beside his chair. Resting there is a die-cast model of the Corsair. It is painted in that familiar, deep ocean blue, its magnificent, inverted gull wings forever frozen in an elegant, sweeping curve. He picks it up gently, cradling the miniature fuselage in the palm of his hand. He does not think of the grand, sweeping narratives of history. He does not think of the battles won, the empires shifted, or the terrifying roar of the massive engines. His mind, as it always has, drifts toward the quiet, unseen spaces. He runs his thumb over the tiny, molded landing gear of the model. In the twilight of his life, William realizes a profound and beautiful truth. His greatest contribution to the world was not a weapon. It was not a sharper blade or a heavier piece of armor. His legacy was a shock absorber. It was a tiny, microscopic doorway hidden in the dark oil and grease, designed simply to let the trapped pressure escape. He had looked at a world that was violently rejecting the young men falling from the sky, and he had drawn a soft place for them to land. He closes his eyes, leaning his head back against the soft fabric of his armchair. In his mind, the empty sky outside his window begins to fill with echoes. He hears the phantom, rushing sigh of the whistling death, but it does not bring fear. It brings the comforting memory of a promise kept. Because of that tiny valve, a beautiful ripple effect washed over the world, moving outward through time like a gentle wave across a quiet pond. William thinks of the boys he never met. He thinks of the pilots who felt the terrifying, weightless terror of the bounce finally vanish, replaced by the heavy, solid thud of a safe return. He pictures a young man named Peter, stepping out of a dark blue cockpit, his hands trembling with relief, walking across a wooden deck to eventually board a ship that would carry him home. Because a valve opened and allowed the fluid to breathe, Peter was able to sit on a quiet porch in a wooden rocking chair, holding the hand of the woman in the photograph. The old engineer smiles, a soft, private smile in the amber light. The echoes continue to wash over him. He thinks of the mechanics, the tired men with permanent ink in the creases of their hands. Men like Walter and Henry, who had carried the heavy, suffocating guilt of sending boys into a flawed machine. That tiny stroke of William's pen had washed their greasy hands clean of that burden. It had allowed them to sleep in the cavernous, dark hangars, listening to the cooling ticks of the engines, knowing they had finally handed their pilots a shield that would not break upon the deck. These are the unseen threads that bind humanity together. We are all connected by quiet moments of grace, by tiny acts of yielding that save us from the hard, unforgiving impacts of the world. To truly understand the weight of these quiet miracles, we must remember the faces of the men who lived through the noise. We must look past the polished silver monuments and the neat, tidy pages of the history books. We must see them as they truly were, exhausted, frightened, incredibly young, and remarkably brave. Finding those unpolished truths, those raw moments of humanity, is a gentle passion of mine. If you find yourself wanting to look directly into the eyes of that unfiltered history, I have gathered a collection of completely raw, unseen media from the war. It is a digital archive of photographs and video fragments that are simply too real, too quiet, and too honest for standard history books. You can find this collection over on my Gumroad. It is a beautiful way to truly witness the hidden human experience of those days, to see the faces of the men who relied on the quiet genius of engineers like William. Please, to keep yourself safe, only use the secure link I've placed in the description below. If you try to search for this on the internet, the top results are unfortunately often fake websites designed to scam you, and I want to make sure you are protected. The afternoon sun begins to dip below the horizon, casting long, melancholy shadows across the floorboards of William's study. The light turns from gold to a deep, bruised violet, the exact color of the Pacific twilight. Far away from this quiet room, in a grassy field surrounded by modern trees, a different kind of echo is taking place. It is a warm summer evening. A small crowd of people has gathered, sitting on soft blankets in the grass, looking up at the pale blue expanse of the sky. Among them is an old man, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, and a young boy, no older than 10, holding tightly to his grandfather's hand. The old man is Walter, the mechanic who used to wipe the salt spray from the aluminum wings in the dim, yellow light of the carrier hangars. Suddenly, a low, resonant hum begins to vibrate through the soles of their shoes. The sound grows, building into a deep, throbbing lullaby of raw, mechanical power. The crowd points to the horizon. Breaking through the wispy, white clouds is a single, dark blue airplane. It is a restored Corsair, a ghost from the past, beautifully polished and perfectly tuned. Its long, elegant nose catches the evening light, and its magnificent, inverted gull wings slice smoothly through the air. As the airplane banks into a gentle turn, the wind rushes into the small intakes at the roots of the wings. The sound falls over the grassy field. It is the high, haunting, rushing wail. The whistling death. But down on the ground, nobody runs for cover. Nobody feels the cold grip of terror. The young boy looks up, his eyes wide with wonder, listening to the sky take a long, rushing breath. Walter closes his eyes. A single, heavy tear slips down his withered cheek. He does not hear a weapon. He hears the voices of the boys he used to care for. He hears the creak of the wooden decks, the smell of the dark oil, and the beautiful, heavy sigh of the landing gear kissing the steel. He squeezes his grandson's hand, feeling the warm, beating pulse of a life that was allowed to exist because so many men worked so hard to bring each other home. The blue airplane climbs higher, pulling away from the earth, becoming a tiny, dark silhouette against the setting sun. The roar of the massive engine fades, and the haunting whistle dissolves into the gentle rustling of the leaves in the trees. The sky is empty once again. But it is not a lonely emptiness. It is a peaceful, resting silence. Back in the quiet study, William opens his eyes. The room has grown dim. He sets the little die-cast model gently back onto the table. His hands are tired. His mind is quiet. He knows that he and his generation will soon fade entirely into the echoes. The draftsmen, the metalworkers, the pilots, and the mechanics will all eventually leave the earth, leaving behind only the photographs, the letters tucked into wooden boxes, and the magnificent machines resting in museums. But he also knows that the lesson they learned in the dark will remain. They learned that when the world demands you to be rigid, the bravest thing you can do is to soften. When the pressure is too great to bear, the greatest genius is found in simply allowing yourself to breathe. William pulls a soft woolen blanket over his lap. He listens to the steady ticking of the clock, a comforting reminder that time moves ever forward, carrying us away from the storms and into the quiet. "We did good," William whispers to the empty room, his voice a frail, gentle rustle in the twilight. "We made it soft enough for them to land." As the stars begin to prick through the velvet darkness of the night sky, casting their pale, silver light over the sleeping cities and the vast, quiet oceans, the world settles into a profound and heavy slumber. The great, roaring engines have finally gone completely cold. The bent wings are resting in the dark. The men who built them, the men who fixed them, and the boys who flew them over the deep are all safely tucked into the gentle embrace of history. There is nothing left to fear from the clouds. There are no more bounces on the wooden decks. There is only the peaceful, sleeping earth, wrapped in a blanket of quiet resilience, listening to the gentle, eternal echoes of a time when humanity looked at an impossible weight, and simply decided to help each other carry it home. Sleep well. The sky is safe, the flight is over, and the beautiful blue birds are finally at rest.